slush fund, the Auditor General reported 82% of transactions, nearly $400 million poured into the pockets of Liberal insiders. The House demanded the government hand these documents to the RCMP. The Prime Minister refuses. How many more millions of dollars, taxpayer dollars?
Well, Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would note that the member made reference to the Charter of Rights. Yesterday I heard Conservative member say that parliamentarians should have the right to put people in jail, Madam Speaker. They have no credibility when it comes to the issue of the Charter of Rights and protecting judicial independence. They are literally laughable yesterday in terms of their performance on this issue. They should be ashamed of the way in which they throw to the side the independent offices of our RCMP and they walk on the...
Honourable Member for Calgary Heritage.
Madam Speaker, the Charter protects people from government, not politicians from prison. I think that the Deputy House Leader would be well advised to think about how every parliamentarian is not above the law. While Canadians struggle with higher taxes, grocery prices and housing costs, Parliament halts. Yet Liberals still hide the truth, refusing to release documents. 2 million people turn to food banks. Liberal insiders get rich. The RCMP investigates. When will Liberals comply with the RCMP, stop obstructing justice, and give Canadians their money back?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I realize the member across the way is relatively new. Let me give him a bit of a refresher. Let me talk about Conservative corruption, the anti-terrorism scandal, the Phoenix scandal, the G8 spending scandal. Remember the gazebo? The ETS scandal, $400 million. The F-35 scandal. What about the Senate scandal? Not to mention the election scandals. Madam Speaker, there's a plural on that one because one of their members actually went to jail. Madam Speaker, we don't need to be taking lessons from the Conservative Party of Canada on scandals. They led the way.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable.
Après 9 ans.
After 9 years of this bloc-backed Liberal government, they're just not worth the cost of corruption. The Liberals have lost control, Madam Speaker. Corruption reigns free in that party. The RCMP is doing another investigation into the Green Slush Fund. $400 million from the Green Slush Fund went to Liberals. The Auditor General alone found 186 conflicts of interest. Why does the Prime Minister refuse to tell the full truth? Why is he hiding documents from the RCMP investigation? Who's he trying to protect?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'm not too sure if the member across the way heard what it is that I said in terms of the Conservative corruption that is out there. This is serious stuff. Where were they when we had this type of corruption taking place? I talked about the anti-terrorism scandal, and the list goes on. I want to focus on the election scandals because the only parliamentarian that I'm aware of that was literally taken away in leg irons was the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, Dean Del Mastro, Madam Speaker. Where was the Conservative Party when the Conservative Party demonstrated so much corruption?
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. You see, Madam Speaker, after 9 years, this government has a culture of secrecy and corruption, all created in the party by the Prime Minister. And it's so deeply rooted, this culture of secrecy, that the House can no longer do its job. This government is hiding documents from Canadians. This government, once again, is flouting a House of Commons order. This government is disrespecting the will of a majority of parliamentarians who want to get to the bottom of the Green Slush Fund. 2 million Canadians are going to food banks. When will Canadians be reimbursed for this government's corruption and incompetence?
Pick up on the word when the member makes reference to disrespect. When I see disrespect is when the official opposition and the leader of the far-right Conservative Party completely ignores the advice that's being provided by the independence of our RCMP as an institution and the Auditor General. Madam Speaker, I think it's irresponsible. It's ridiculous that the leader of the Conservative Party ignores that information. At the same time, when we talk about corruption, talk to me about the individual that walked away in leg irons because of Conservative...
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. the House voted to put an end to having two classes of seniors by increasing by 10% OAS payments for those aged 65 to 74. 79% of Canadians who were polled support this. The Minister for Seniors will have to explain this. He is penalizing 12,000 seniors in his riding of Gatineau, 30,000 in the Greater Gatineau area. Can he explain why his government would prefer to call an election rather than give these seniors a single penny more? The Honourable Minister for Seniors. I thank the member for correcting the math brought up yesterday about the number of 65 to 74-year-olds in the riding of Gatineau. He didn't apologize, but thank you for correcting it. Now, there is some more math for this House. 10,000, Madam Speaker. 10,000 constituents in his very riding who today are eligible for the federal Canadian Dental Care Plan that we implemented despite his vote against this plan, which helps so many people. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Soon, they will have an opportunity to apologize to many seniors. What do the Liberals do for seniors? The Minister for Seniors is depriving 12,000 people of 10% increase in their OAS, and the Quebec Lieutenant is depriving 15,000 people, and the Prime Minister who represents Papineau is depriving 8,000 seniors of an increase. We, the Bloc Québécois, will do everything for those seniors. With Liberal MPs and ministers like that, wouldn't we be better off with an election? The Honourable Minister for Seniors. Madam Speaker, not only have we supported seniors by targeting supports to the most vulnerable seniors, we've also invested in housing. We're also very proud to have increased OAS. We also increased the exemption for taxable income so that we could help seniors who wanted to remain in the labour market. Do you know who voted against all of that, all of those measures, Madam Speaker? The member across the way and his whole party, the Bloc Québécois.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, corruption is up, and time is up. Now it's confirmed that the RCMP is doing an investigation into this Liberal Green slush fund. $330 million of taxpayer funds was paid out in 186 cases of conflicts of interest. It is despicable that Liberal insiders lined their own pockets. Those who broke the law must be brought to justice. So when will this scandal-ridden government hand over all the documents to the RCMP and recover every last dollar of embezzled funds?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I would pose the question, when will the Conservative Party actually start respecting the independence of the RCMP? When will they take and start respecting the independence of the Auditor General? When will they actually start to work for Canadians inside the House of Commons by stop talking so that we could actually get on to government legislation and do what the resolution or the motion that they brought forward, and that was to see the bill or the motion actually go to the Standing Committee, Madam Speaker.
The
Honourable Member from Montmagny, Lille, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Madam Speaker, 9 years of this Liberal government means 9 years of scandals. The RCMP has opened another investigation. Corruption has become synonymous with this Liberal government. Canadians are still waiting for answers about the Liberal Green Slush Fund, which paid $390 million in 180 cases of conflict of interest. This is Canadians' money, Madam Speaker. Canadians can't afford to house themselves or eat if all of their money ends up in the hands of Liberal insiders. Madam Speaker, when will this corrupt Liberal government allow Canadians to keep their money? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
I have had the opportunity to answer this question, and I think in fairness, what I would like to suggest to the members opposite, that they really do listen to what the RCMP and the Auditor General have to say on the issue. If they want to do a comparison, as I've tried to highlight, the many different scandals of the Stephen Harper era in which the leader of the Conservative Party today was a part of that cabinet, Madam Speaker, I think that they need to start reflecting internally on their behavior, because not once did they ever make the type of inquiry or demand, rather than...
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Lacombe.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, time is up, and incompetence is up. The Minister of the Environment ignored the science, and as a result, Jasper burned. The proof? His own executives were caught discussing cancelling prescribed burns for political optic reasons. Yet prescribed burns are an essential tool for preventing wildfires. Will this minister accept responsibility for his failure and apologize to the 2,000 residents of Jasper who have lost their homes and their businesses?
Minister of Environment.
What the member opposite just said is simply not true. And if I wasn't in this House, I would probably be using another word. There's been 15 prescribed burns in the last 10 years, Madam Speaker, and the email he's referring to are Parks Canada employee discussing whether or not to use mechanical removals or prescribed burns. What he's saying is absolutely false, and he should be ashamed, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Environment claims to be proud of his preparations for the catastrophic Jasper wildfire, yet 1/3 of Jasper was destroyed. $1 billion in damages. 2,000 people homeless. It can hardly be described as a success. Everyone knew Jasper was a tinderbox. My former colleague Jim McGlinskey even tried to warn the government in this House as far back as 2016, yet not enough was done to protect the town of Jasper. How many more parks need to burn down before this minister is replaced by somebody who knows how fire works?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Talk about what we're doing on this side and what they did when they were in power. The last year that this party was in power, $2 million to fight forest fires with Parks Canada. What we've done in the last few years, $85 million to help fight forest fires, to give means to our forest firing force at Parks Canada to work with the Alberta government, to work with the City of Jasper. $2 million on their side, $85 million on our side, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nunavut.
Okaktitiyi Indigenous elders endured genocidal policies resulting in Indigenous women and girls being missing and murdered. Thanks to the Liberals, Wik-Wemkong First Nations elders are on the verge of exile. Long-term care facilities are important for passing on intergenerational love and knowledge to keep Indigenous peoples alive. Liberals are refusing an act of reconciliation. When will this government deliver the funding needed for the Wik-Wemkong elders' home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her question. And it's true that elders are an important part of Indigenous communities. We know that it's important to continue to support Indigenous women, especially on Sisters in Spirit Day. And I'd also like to just, while I have the ability, to congratulate the Nova Scotia Native Women's Association on their brand new Indigenous Women's Resilience Centre. They opened last month. It's the first ever in provinces across Canada. So congratulations to Nova Scotia Native Women's Association on an amazing achievement.
The Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
The minister said they would hold back the Canada Disability Benefit until July 2025. What a disgrace. Over 1 million people with disabilities live in poverty today. They need support to pay for rent, groceries, and medication. And the Conservatives are no better. They'll cut dental care, health care, essential services persons with disabilities are entitled to. This government needs to act now, not next year. Will they stop the delay and deliver the Canada Disability Benefit immediately?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, this opposition party, the Conservative Party, will do nothing at all for persons with disabilities. We are the party that has stood by persons with disabilities, $6.1 billion to help people with disabilities be lifted, and this was in our budget, the biggest line item. We are proud of this, the Canada Disability Benefit. We are standing with the disability community, working together to uplift people. We are the government that is doing this. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for Markham Stouffville.
Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve reliable and safe travel options. That means efficient airports that can adapt to high demand. It also includes targeted investments in regional airports, such as at the Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport, located on the beautiful Toronto Islands. Could the Minister of Transport update this House about a recent announcement that will benefit Canadian travellers and improve connectivity?
The Honourable President of the Treasury Board and Minister of Transport.
Madam Speaker, Canadians are asking for better service at airports. Last week, I was pleased to make an announcement at Billy Bishop Toronto City Airport with having pre-clearance at that airport. Canadians can expect smoother travel between Canada and the United States. More travel options, more economic growth, more tourism, more trade, more security. Madam Speaker, that's what it's all about. Unlike the opposition, we are here for Canadians. We're here for productivity.
The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Minister from Edmonton misled committee when he testified that he had no communications with his shady business partner at or around the time of an alleged $500,000 fraud implicating a Randy. But when phone records demonstrated that that wasn't true, he changed his story and admitted to phoning and texting the shady business partner at that very time. If the minister isn't for Randy implicated in the alleged fraud, why did he mislead committee?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker, it's all about character assassination from the Conservatives. Not once, but twice, the minister in question has actually been cleared by the Ethics Commissioner. Having said that, Madam Speaker, instead of attacking personalities day in and day out, maybe the Conservative Party should start listening to what Canadians are wanting to deal with. Why isn't the Conservative Party being a little bit more forthright on what their hidden agenda is really about? Canadians want to see a dental program, a pharmacare program, a school food program, a child care program, and a healthy health program.
Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, let's get this straight. Text messages implicating Randy. The minister's shady business partner can't identify another Randy. We know that the minister contacted his shady business partner at the time of the alleged fraud, and text messages place the Randy in Vancouver at the same time as the minister. How much evidence is it going to take for the Prime Minister to fire this corrupt minister?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, Madam Speaker, I've already answered that question. And at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, what is it going to take for the Conservative Party and the leader of that far-right Conservative Party to understand that there is an obligation to be responsible here in Ottawa on the floor of the House of Commons, Madam Speaker? That means allowing debates to occur on the important issues that Canadians are facing today. Instead of focusing their attention on the Conservative Party, Madam Speaker, they should be focusing their attention on Canadians.
Hear, hear. The member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, the member dodged the question the first two times, so let's give him a third time. The Minister of Employment and his business partner, Stephen Anderson, have refused to cooperate with an investigation into their fraud-ridden company. For months, this minister claimed that he had no communication, that he wasn't the one referenced in the text, and that he had nothing to do with his former business partner. Finally, after relentless pressure, the minister admitted he did text his business partner, and he even called him to discuss their business, something he's prohibited from doing by law. Why did the minister, who claimed he had nothing to hide for months, hide this damning evidence?
The Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I've indicated very clearly the Ethics Commissioner, which is an independent office of the House of Commons, has not once but twice cleared the minister. Having said that, Madam Speaker, my challenge to the Conservative Party across the way is to understand that they actually have a responsibility to Canadians that goes beyond serving the Conservative Party of Canada. Madam Speaker, I would suggest that they are doing a great disservice to Canadians in every region of the country by the behavior that they take day in and day out on the floor of the House of Commons.
Member for Sturgeon River, Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, I would say that this Liberal government has a responsibility to tell Canadians the truth. This minister, only after turning over his phone to the Ethics Commissioner, only after months of relentless pressure, finally admitted that he did indeed talk to his business partner, something he's not allowed to do under law. He admits that they discussed business, and this was after his business partner lied to a parliamentary committee by ridiculously claiming that the 9 references to the minister was just an autocorrect. If the minister can't be trusted to disclose what he called just an innocent conversation, how can he be trusted to be truthful?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, not once, but twice the Ethics Commissioner has cleared the minister. That is the truth. The member makes reference to the truth. Seriously, Madam Speaker, this comes from a Conservative, that ultimately a Conservative party that spreads so much misinformation and false facts, fake news, you name it, through social media, Madam Speaker. When are they going to start to be honest with Canadians and tell them what their hidden agenda is all about? I'll tell you why, because they know that...
The Honourable Member for Joliette. The Senate is thumbing its nose at farmers. This is the proof. In '82, a bill with one article supported by all the members of this House was stuck in the Senate for more than a year. More than a year to study more than one article on supply management. How come the Senate is taking so much time to study C-76 yesterday? 3 days, not one, but 3. 2 Liberal-appointed senators are blocking this bill. They are mocking farmers. Can we ask them to stop this? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Of course, we're a party that has always supported supply management. We also support this bill in question, and we expect the other place to pass this legislation. But we haven't talked about to the other party across the aisle, the official opposition. They've been rather quiet on this issue, and I hope they will also make calls to their Conservative colleagues there. The Honourable Member for Joliette. What we're asking is to speak to the senators, because their role should be to approve bills that are voted on by elected officials. This is our democracy that needs to be put first. There are 2 unknown senators that no one voted for that are blocking all of this legislation. And I would like to remind you that if this bill is not adopted by October 29th, we'll be not supporting the Liberals. And we have to protect our farmers, or are we just protecting our own behinds here? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. As I said already, we're a part of it's always supported supply management. We're going to continue to do so, and we're expecting the other place to pass this bill. And I know that my Bloc colleagues are doing their work at the Senate, as are we. We're making calls, but once again, I haven't heard the official opposition make any calls on their side of the House on this bill.
After 9 years, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost or the corruption. We now know the Prime Minister's friend and media buddy, Tom Clark, was instrumental when it came to purchasing his new $9 million luxury condo on Billionaires Row in New York, a condo which includes Italian marble, a $5,000 coffee machine, and a golf simulator. This as Canadians continue to struggle with an unprecedented cost of living crisis. Will the Liberal government admit there is no justification for Canadian taxpayers having to foot the bill for this lavish condo?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The truth is, and the fact is simple, that the new residence that has been purchased will cut costs, will save money. On this side of the House, we'll always stand up for Canada and the best interests of Canadians. We'll engage with international leaders. We will continue to do the work that we need to do internationally, diplomatically, while saving taxpayers' money. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The Liberal $60 million Arrive scam exposed contracting fraud on taxpayers, called bait and switch. High-priced consultants overbill, underdeliver, and sometimes don't even do the work. High-priced consultants line their pockets while taxpayers are paying the bills. Canada's contracting watchdog is launching a review. How much contracting fraud will taxpayers be on the hook for, and will the Liberals get Canadians their money back?
Great question.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we have said time and time again that we expect our procurement process to follow all of the rules and regulations. Any misconduct will come with severe consequences. The CBSA has already implemented a number of measures to strengthen the transparency around procurement processes. They are working with the various commissioners to find additional ways to ensure that Canadians can have trust in our procurement process with CBSA, and we are supportive of the CBSA's work in this area.
The Honourable Member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, according to media reports, this Liberal government has covered up the contamination of a Transport Canada dock operated in northern Albertan Indigenous communities. The big dock, as it's referred to, is known as a community hub. It's where couples go for a walk, where people fish, where kids go to play and swim. Did this government really cover up the contamination of this dock? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I want to say that safety is my top priority as Minister of Transport, and I hear and understand the concerns from the First Nations communities. It is absolutely crucial for remote and northern and Indigenous communities to have access to safe and reliable connectivity that they need. I will work with them to ensure that the operations at the facility are being carried out safely. The work is ahead of us, and we will make sure that we're on top of it. Thank you.
Good answer. Honourable Member for Ottawa-Vanier.
Madam Speaker, wildfires are becoming more and more unpredictable. As keepers of the land, Indigenous communities have long held deep local knowledge to mitigate their impacts. Earlier this week, the Leader of the Opposition tokenized Indigenous cultural practices when it comes to protecting the environment. To the Minister of Indigenous Services, why is it important that First Nations take the lead when protecting communities, lands, and waters?
Here, here. The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, thank you so much to the member for Ottawa-Vanier for the question. And as she knows, there's a direct link between climate change and wildfires, extreme wildfires that we've been seeing across the country worsening for First Nation members. And so we've changed the way that the Government of Canada supports First Nations so that they have the supports financially and from a self-determination place to be able to protect their communities. And good news, last wildfire season, Madam Speaker, half as many people evacuated from First Nations communities. We're going to continue to work with the real experts in this country, Madam Speaker, First Nations and their partner.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Madam Speaker, another day, another shooter on our streets. This time a 21-year-old dirtbag, or as described by a veteran detective, a muppet, with a record of 21 failures to comply with court orders, and not surprisingly, out on bail, sent a young cop to the emergency ward with a bullet in his gut. This NDP Liberal government's hug-a-thug mentality is putting cops and the public in emergency rooms and in morgues. When will this government prioritize safety rather than empathy for cop shooters?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That last statement is just outrageous. I live in the City of Toronto where this police officer worked. Myself, my family, and my neighbours rely on them every single day, and we're grateful for the work they do.
Hear, hear.
This member is a former Crown prosecutor, as he likes to remind us time and time again. It's provincial responsibility to deal with the enforcement of bail laws. The Crown prosecutors are appointed by the Province of Ontario. The Justices of the Peace who administer the laws are appointed and paid for by the Province of Ontario. He's asking the wrong people the question.
The Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Almost everyone they arrest is out on bail. No one stays in jail where they belong. And they laugh. This is the president of the Toronto Police Association. Wake up. Every day, Canadians are waking up to more news of shootings and murders. The minister bragged that his bail reform bill would make our streets safer, but the truth is more criminals are out on bail and Canadians are more frightened than ever. This bill is a complete failure. How many more lost lives is it going to take for the government to finally embrace jail, not bail, for serious violence?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once again, he's pointing in the wrong direction. Right. There are justices of the peace every day in the province of Ontario who are releasing people on bail because of the inhumane conditions.
Can I interrupt the honourable member? I had a question. We allow the Parliamentary Secretary to answer. Order! From the top.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Every single day in the province of Ontario, there are justices of the peace who are appointed by the provincial government, who are letting people out on bail because the conditions inside provincially built, provincially funded, and provincially operated prisons are inhumane and not okay for people, even prisoners, to be in. There is judicial decisions by justices of the peace who have considered this fact regularly, and they said until those conditions change, that's going to be a major consideration when they're listening to bail applications.
The honourable member for Kildonan St. Paul.
The fact is, Madam Speaker, after 9 years of these Liberals, of these NDP Liberals, violent crime in Canada is up 50%. That is their responsibility, Madam Speaker, and it's really no wonder. Police report there are 790 repeat violent offenders just walking the streets in Mississauga and Brampton. Police say almost everyone they arrest is out on bail, yet Liberals have made it very clear, especially yesterday in question period, that they support repeat violent offenders getting bail no matter what, no matter who gets hurt, Madam Speaker. What is it going to take for the Liberals to realize that their catch and release policies are costing innocent Canadians their lives?
Parliamentary Secretary.
They just don't understand, Madam Speaker. They don't want to understand, Madam Speaker. The laws are in place. They can't be enforced properly because the province is underfunding the system. 1 hour ago, none other than Ben Mulroney was on his podcast, and he said one of the biggest problems is the lack of resources provided by the provincial government in the province of Ontario, and that's why people are getting out on bail. Full stop. They need to pay attention, look in the right direction. The laws here are in place. They stop sensationalizing and be serious.
The honourable member for Dartmouth Cole Harbour.
Madam Speaker, the Halifax Regional Municipality is home to a thriving maritime defence industry. Fleet Week, the Halifax International Security Forum, and of course our Atlantic Navy Fleet. In Dartmouth Cole Harbour alone, we're home to a thriving defence innovation ecosystem, including the Centre for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship, and hundreds of startups and established companies working and innovating in this sector. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence share with this House how our government's investments in defence and industry will benefit the Halifax Regional Municipality, Canada, and the world?
Secretary to the Minister of National Defence.
Thank you very much. As a proud founding member of NATO, we know Canada must do our fair share on the world stage. And this week, I was very pleased to open one of 3 international headquarters for the NATO Defence Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic, or DIANA, in Halifax, Madam Speaker. DIANA will facilitate cooperation between military operators and NATO's best and brightest startups, researchers, and tech companies. While the Conservatives are against funding for NATO DIANA, we on this side of the House are investing in Atlantic Canadian ingenuity and promoting NATO's defence excellence here at home.
The honourable member for Esquimalt-Saanich-Sooke.
Canada made a commitment to eliminate new cases of HIV by 2030, and there's still time to stop the spread of HIV, which is now hitting Indigenous women and other marginalized Canadians hardest. Community-based HIV organizations have laid out the necessary path in 2 proposals costing less than $175 million. Will this government provide the necessary funding to community-based HIV/AIDS organizations to ensure all Canadians are able to access HIV testing and then get connected to care? Or, despite its promises, is this government okay to continue to see the number of new HIV cases in Canada rise instead of fall?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I want to thank the member opposite for his steadfast advocacy for patients suffering from HIV/AIDS. I believe that the member opposite would agree that we are all committed to making sure that we provide care for people who suffer from HIV/AIDS, and that's why our government has been investing over almost $90 million to help tackle sexually transmitted and blood-borne infections across Canada, which includes almost over $30 million under the HIV and Hepatitis C Community Action Fund and the Harm Reduction Fund. Of course, there's more work to be done, and we'll continue to work with all members of this House to ensure that all Canadians suffering from HIV...
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabaska. Madam Speaker, Quebecers who use community clinics, hospital dental departments, or long-term care homes can't access the federal dental care program because of disputes between the Quebec and Canadian governments. Some of these patients are children, are vulnerable, or less affluent, or have a disability. Dentists are sorry that they can't register their patients. All of these people are trapped and penalized because our governments can't get their act together. Can the Prime Minister tell us what stage discussions are at so that this unacceptable situation can be resolved? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for his question, and I share his indignation with respect to the Quebec government that wants to prevent dental treatment to the most vulnerable members of our society, people who are in long-term care homes, children in the hospital, Saint-Justine, who don't have access to this care, even though they pay their taxes. Normally, the Bloc would be against this, and I would ask them to add their voices to ours. It's a lack of judgment from the Quebec government.
Ainsi prend fin la période de questions orales. Volume des...
Earpiece volume. I wish to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset.
We'll have to readjust the volume. Okay, daily routine of business. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents? No. Introduction of government bills. Statements by ministers. Reports from interparliamentary delegations. Présentation de rapports de comité. Dépôt de projets de loi émanant de députés. Première lecture des projets de loi d'intérêt public émanant du Sénat. Motions. Présentation de pétitions. Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I rise to present a petition in which petitioners are calling on this Parliament to pass Bill S-281, known as Brian's Bill, in honor of Brian Olisic, who was murdered in a triple murder at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, and petitioners are calling for this bill to be passed to prevent criminals convicted of multiple murders, or murder for that matter, from being eligible for parole after serving their minimum sentence.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Petitioners from my constituency in Saanich Gulf Islands have been persistent in raising issues, including in this petition, relating to the need to protect old-growth forests and the species that depend upon them, particularly in the case of the marbled murrelet, an extraordinarily small seabird that only nests on the forest floor of old-growth forests. The petitioners are calling for the Government of Canada to immediately protect all critical old-growth habitat for marbled murrelets, and that would be habitat that could be protected federally through the Canadian government's commitment to the Migratory Birds Convention Act. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Présentation de pétition, je reconnais l'honorable député de Bruce Grey.
Presenting petitions, the Honourable Member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Two petitions to present today. The first petition, signed by a number of my constituents in my riding, actually supports my private member's bill 377, which would allow parliamentarians to apply for a secret security clearance, and they call upon the House here to swiftly pass my bill to allow parliamentarians that ability to apply for a secret security clearance. The second petition I have to present is one where the constituents in my riding are pointing out that after 9 years of this Liberal government that the economy is in terrible shape, there's crime, chaos and drugs in the street, and therefore they're calling upon the government to axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime, and immediately have a vote of non-confidence. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Présentation de pétition. Questions inscrites au feuilleton. Je reconnais le secrétaire parlementaire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that all questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Ordre du jour.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour. Resuming debate on a privilege motion concerning the alleged failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, standing in the name of Mr. Scheer, and on the amendment of Mr. Berthoud.
Avant que je reconnaisse.
Before giving the floor to the next speaker, I would just mention that the member for Saanich Gulf Island has some time left, but I want to ensure that interpretation is working properly. Is everything working? Yes. Very well. So 1 minute left. A brief question. The member for Saanich Gulf Islands has 1 minute. The honourable member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you, Speaker. So my question to the honourable member is look, this is an organization with that had incredible potential, $1 billion. It received a clean audit in 2017 after being under Conservative stewardship, but following the appointment of a Liberal-friendly board chair, we have seen identified conflict of interest and frankly, grift and corruption. Does she think that we need to have these documents referred to the RCMP so that Canadians can get accountability for their money?
L'honorable député de Saanich.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands, 30 seconds, please.
Thank you to my honourable colleague from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes. I hope I got that right. The question of reference to the RCMP is of less critical importance to me as a parliamentarian than that when Parliament asks for the documents, they should be delivered to Parliament. But that was part of the motion that was carried. The RCMP is, of course, a separate agency from Parliament, and I think it's important to recognize that. But once the House has them, we should make them public, and that would include the RCMP.
Reprise du débat, l'honorable député Denis Pian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've been listening to this debate for quite some time, and some of the interesting things I'm learning. But it has still not clarified certain confusion I have. I keep hearing the word Parliament is supreme. I agree that the Parliament is supreme in many ways, but does it have absolute power as we say it is supreme? And I am not very sure that we have that. Canadian system of government, Mr. Speaker, as we all know, that we have three branches. The legislative branch, which passes the laws, the executive that implements those laws, and the judicial branch that interprets them. So this is the thing I understand, and both the RCMP and Auditor General have expressed their concern that the separation of powers that we have is getting blurred in this instant. Whenever Parliament has got lots of powers, but we are subject to the Constitution. In my limited knowledge, I can say that while we have the process to amend the Constitution, but as long as there is a Constitution, we have to follow whatever we do. It has to be within that confines of the things laid out in the Constitution. Whenever the word supreme is used, for me, in the democratic context, it reminds me of the word supreme used to describe, say, the Iranian supreme leader who has trampled on the basic fundamental rights of millions and millions of Iranian people. But the current government, the current system, they describe him as the supreme leader, basically giving him the absolute power to do anything he wants. Again, there's another country in the world where the word is actually used. The supreme word is used in this constitution, that is North Korea. North Korean constitution explicitly names its chief as the supreme leader who represents the state. So whenever the word supreme is used, I am slightly uncomfortable because in my view it denotes absolute power, and we know that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that is something that I am concerned about. And the Westminster system of democracy we follow is being followed in other parts of the world. Some exactly follow the model that is being followed in United Kingdom. Some others, small variations, but fundamentally they are all the same. In some countries, there is no clear division of power, though it may be there in their constitution, but I know one of the biggest democracies in the world where the legislatures interfere directly in the working of the executive, in the day-to-day administration. That is the sole responsibility executive. There's a constant, direct interference. But we are not that. We are a different society. We follow the Constitution. Some people ask me, how come Canada is rich? Canada is so successful when there are other countries who have more natural resources, more richness in natural resources than Canada. So I explained to them that Canada is rich, successful, one of the best countries to live in the world, because the way the society has organized itself. The society has promoted this democratic concept, and the elected officials at all levels of the governments are answerable to the people who elect them. And that is something that keeps a good check on the powers of the elected officials. So in Canada, we have been always following the rule of the law. Again, there are many countries who may be richer in natural resources than us, but they are not as successful because the way we have organized ourselves, the Canadian society has organized itself, is not practiced in those countries. So again, for me, whenever people say Parliament is supreme, this is the concern I have, that I think we should understand what is allowed by law, by Constitution, and what is the Convention. Convention is also as important as the rule of the law, like the spirit of the law is as important as the letter of the law. On STDC, I am actually disappointed what happened in STDC. One of the three objectives that brought me into politics, my third objective was that I wanted to ensure that Canada continues to remain at the forefront of the knowledge-based economies. The world is moving towards a knowledge-based economy, so I wanted to ensure that Canada is at the forefront of the new technologies, the new innovations that are heralding the countries into this global digital economy. I wanted to ensure that. And before joining politics, Mr. Speaker, I was on the board of Invest Ottawa. Invest Ottawa is a great organization. It was set up to promote Ottawa, to lead Ottawa into the new world by promoting the technology sector. Ottawa is a government town. We all know that. Maximum number of federal employees live in this beautiful city. But the city of Ottawa, when the then mayor Jim Watson was elected, formed this Invest Ottawa so that we can focus on using the knowledge power we have to promote the technology sector. And I was working in private sector, in private defense technology sector then. I was asked to come on the board. And we are so proud that Ottawa is moving in the direction that was envisaged when Invest Ottawa was formed. So STDC was a good addition to the various things that are there, various institutions are there that promote not only the new technologies but sustainable technologies, all those things that help Canada to move to get its rightful place at the forefront of the knowledge-based economy. So I was very happy to see the operations of STDC. One, it was funding the new technologies, the sustainable technologies. And I was very disappointed when the reports start coming up where the conflict of interest was being floated and the number of instances during which it was being done. That was very painful for me to hear. Now that STDC has come under the Natural Resources Canada, that is a matter of concern to me. No disrespect to the bureaucrats, the officials working at Natural Resources Canada. They have successfully managing certain industrial assistance programs like the IRAP, Industrial Research Assistant Program. They have been successfully managing that, but still it's a government department. So it doesn't have the flexibility that an arm's length body like STDC has. We have got great crown corporations from Export Development Canada to other major crown corporations. So STDC on its own as a crown corporation would have the flexibility of conducting its operations, wherein the things related to new technology is not actually available in paper well in advance for the people to gain knowledge, understand them, and take moves to promote them. So it needed people who are actually in the field to help and guide the funding of these new technologies, new companies. So that was a good way of promoting this, but now it has come into Natural Resources Canada. So I have a bit of a concern that the bureaucratic rules, they're certainly not, is not a problem, bureaucracy by its actual definition, but sometimes the rules that get evolved by the bureaucratic systems that does cast to tighten the flexibility that is required to promote new technologies. So that unfortunate is development. Now I'm waiting and seeing. The funding has been restored. The funding streams have been restored. I believe they are working now. And I am looking forward to see how the companies are getting funded from STDC through the NRC house they're in. So that is a matter of concern. And again, talking of STDC and the new technologies, Mr. Speaker, I'm very much interested in the mines to mobility sector. This is the movement of the world towards the clean economy. It is offering us $1 trillion opportunity. $1 trillion opportunity. More than that, it is a necessity for us. It is necessity for us to be part of that clean economy, but at the same time, this necessity also offers an economic opportunity. So this thing, Mines to Mobility, is a larger, it's a small part of this larger movement towards that, and this strategy is expected to position government at the forefront of this new electrical vehicle sectors and everything connected to batteries, including the energy storage. One small thing about energy storage, Mr. Speaker, is that the potential of energy storage is huge, and it makes the wind power, the solar power, much more viable propositions. Today, the wind power and the solar power are economically viable on their own, but the efficiency that brings in with the storage that we can have, the energy storage that we can achieve through the batteries, makes them much more viable, and that will transform the movement towards a clean economy. I'm from Ontario. I'm glad to state that Ontario is one country that has moved away from power generation using coal. I wish the entire Canada we move towards that. Recently, I heard a report, one of the G7 countries or one of the OECD countries became the first country to move entire power generation without using coal. I think we should go towards that. Coming back to STDC and the Mines to Mobility, there are certain things what organizations like STDs can do. They can identify the new technology. However, these new technologies have to be implemented. When our government was formed in 2015, we renamed the industry ministry as Innovation and Economic Development, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Ministry. Then I told the then minister, please don't use the word innovation in any sentence if you don't have the word commercialization also in the same sentence. So the Mines to Mobility things is going up. There are still problems in there. The time required for the development of new mines is quite the regulatory barriers that exploration of new mines is still too long. I know the federal government is working with the provinces by forming, for example, we have formed what is called the Ontario table with the province of Ontario, so that we can all align our resources to reduce the timeline required, to stop sequential approval process instead of what we can do concurrently or simultaneously, and reduce the time that is required to develop new mines. Well, that is a problem. In the Mines to Mobility thing, we have also got a problem with related to processing of these minerals. Today, China controls 70 to 90% of the processing of critical minerals that are the most essential part of movements towards the electrical vehicle industry and the energy storage industries using batteries. And we don't have enough projects in the pipeline yet to make us comfortable that we will take our rightful position in the entire Mines to Mobility spectrum. So that is something that has been pending. Hopefully we should be able to address this. And another, again, our system of federation means that certain powers are not with the federal government, but it is with the provincial government. Again, under the Mines to Mobility strategy, one key component is the transmission and distribution. The electric grid is under the provincial jurisdiction, and I don't see a lot of things happening there. I hope a federal government will take a step forward working with provinces to make sure that the huge expected usage of electricity that is going to come, and we have enough power generation and the grid for the transmission and distribution of that. On the power generation front, I have no issues. I think we can crank up the power generations by using the natural gas that we have. But is the grid, the electricity grid for the transportation and transmission and distortion, that is something that we need to look at. And again, STDC was one small part of the bigger objective for us to move towards this clean economy, this $1 trillion opportunities. I think we have to refocus again on how to bring it back to its original objective, in delivering its original objectives under this. And on this particular motion, Mr. Speaker, there are some concerns. RCMP and Auditor General both have expressed their deep concern that we are blurring the separation of powers that that has been described in our Constitution. So whenever Auditor General says, I give the Auditor General words utmost respect. When I got first elected in 2015, for the first 4 years, I was the member of Public Accounts Committee. I did not know the importance of that committee till I joined. Then I realized that is the most important oversight committee that the House of Commons has. And that is where I interacted for 4 years with the then Auditor General and learned quite a bit about the role of the Office of Auditor General and how important it is in the functioning of our country's system. And whenever the Auditor General expresses a matter of concern, whenever expresses any concern on any of the things that we do, I take it with utmost respect and with utmost seriousness, and that is where I have the problem with this motion. Because according to RCMP and according to Auditor General, they are concerned about the blurring of this division of responsibility, the separation of the powers. And RCMP in particular, Mr. Speaker, I understand in July RCMP had written to the law clerk of the House of Commons that they have got difficulty in accepting and using the documents or the records that has been contemplated now through this motion in their investigation, because it will trample on the charter rights of the suspects. So my problem is that if RCMP is unable to use the records, the files that we intend to pass it on to them, then are we not actually defeating the very purpose what we want to achieve, that any criminality should be probed and investigated and the criminal should be brought to justice? What we are doing here, in my view, is sort of counterproductive to the ultimate object of all members of this House. Our objective is that any suspected corruption should be thoroughly investigated, the criminal should be brought to book. However, the process that we are adopting here, it may act as a barrier in achieving that. That is the major problem I have, major concern I have with this. I have listened to many of the members here, but still now nobody has been. I have asked questions several times to several members. RCMP is an independent body, and they know what to do, how to do. We don't have to tell them how to do it. If they want any record, any file, they know the process. They have got a legal process that they can go through and obtain whatever they want to for them to complete their investigation. But if we should not hinder in their ability or the capacity to do their work. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires, je reconnais.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Speaker, I appreciated the intervention from the member from Nepean, and I also appreciate, as a fellow member of the Industry Committee, the work that he does. He asks usually, not usually, all the time, very thoughtful questions, and I appreciate that. And I listened to your intervention on this privilege motion intently, and I know that you also have an extensive business career before you were elected in 2015. Sorry, this member had an extensive business background. And I want to ask this member, in that situation when he was an investment banker, if he found that one of the people that worked for him had taken client money, would he have waited till the RCMP discovered it and applied to the court to get the documents, or would he have called in the police himself and turned the documents over? Because that's the essence and the difference in the argument that the government is making versus we are with this production of documents.
Honorable député de Nepean.
The Honourable Member for Nepean.
I thank the Honourable Member for his words. Just a clarification, I was not an investment banker, I was an investment advisor. The investment advisor sounds is basically a sales job of getting a business. Anyway, that is not the question here. The example the Honourable Member gave, if I had an employee who did something wrong, will I not refer him or her to RCMP? That is exactly right, we do that. But here, the situation is not the same. RCMP is aware. In fact, if I recall, during the question period, the Honourable Member mentioned that the RCMP has started the investigation or something to that words. So when the RCMP has started or is aware, if they have started their investigation, they have got a legal process through which they can obtain any records that may need in their investigation, and that will not trample on the charter rights of any Canadians.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments.
Je reconnais le...
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
So what we've seen before
with this government when there have been document production orders from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The government has used things like invoking cabinet confidence to not release documents to the RCMP. The RCMP has been very clear that that's a matter of fact and matters dealing with this Prime Minister. What the House has done here, though, is made an order, a legally binding order of the government. So we have a solution to the problem that the RCMP would eventually face when looking to get these records, and that's the government looking to obstruct it. But we also have a legal order from the House of Commons to produce it. So what is the legal basis that this government thinks that it can now just decide what the House of Commons can and cannot do? Does this Prime Minister know better than the majority of members democratically elected to this House of Commons?
L'honorable député.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member said that RCMP will eventually face problems. RCMP has not expressed any problems. RCMP have not stated that they are not getting any records or the documents that they need in this investigation. If the time comes when RCMP expressly states that they are facing a problems, then a solution can be worked out. But let's not presume or assume that RCMP will eventually face problems and try to push forward a solution which is actually counterproductive.
Questions et commentaires, l'honorable.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Speaker, the member for Nepean said that he was concerned with conflicts of interest. And disappointed, and I would say that's putting it mildly, because we're talking here about 186 conflicts of interest involving board members, in which $330 million improperly went out the door, much of it funneled into board members' companies. Now, the Minister of Industry knew about it, or had to have known about it, given the fact that an assistant deputy minister sat in on each and every board meeting when these conflicts occurred. So what does the member say about the minister's responsibility and, frankly, his complicity in the corruption at the Green Slush Fund? Because if one were to listen to the member's remarks, one would be under the impression that this was some distant arm's-length foundation when nothing could be further from the truth.
Good point. L'honorable député Denis.
The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the member about the severity of the conflict of interest, especially when huge amounts of money is involved. I absolutely agree this matter has to be investigated. If there is corruption or any criminality there, it has to be investigated, and the criminals should be brought to justice. My only question is that, what's the process? The process, in my view, is that RCMP is aware of it, and according to another member today, the RCMP has started their investigation. Let us go through that process. Let us not do something that actually hinders the process of investigation.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member and Parliamentary Secretary.
I want to pick up on the point that we have to ensure that people understand that are following the debate that the ministers responsible took action. There was independent reviews that were done once it was found out upon. We had the Auditor General in Canada taking action on, in which we've complied with or working with the Auditor General. And at the end of the day, there was a freezing of the funds when we had found out the new funds that were going to be allocated out. These are all tangible things to ensure that there is accountability. And in terms of transparency, we had standing committee that has had all sorts of discussions on it. Today's debate is to send it back to a standing committee. And my question to the member is, would he just pick up on the point that why the Conservative Party doesn't listen to what the RCMP are actually saying in terms of their concern with respect to the manner in which this motion is actually even being brought because of very real concerns that they have.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I agree with the member that there are various actions that have been taken. The moment this was brought to the notice, Auditor General looked into it, and there's a process involved. And I too have the concern what the member is implying, that the process that we are going through it is a bit problematic. I'm still not very clear whether it's going to be productive. My concern is that the process that we are adopting here is going to be counterproductive, and it may actually hamper the investigation.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for South Shore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member for Winnipeg North clearly hasn't followed all the facts on all of this. The member doesn't clearly understand that what happened here was that a whistleblower came to the department, the minister's department, after 40 months the current minister had been sitting in his office while he had an ADM in every meeting where 82% of the transactions were conflicted. Yet it took a whistleblower going to the department for 3 months, and after frustration that nothing happened with the minister, that whistleblower went public and it appeared in the media, and all of a sudden then the minister says, oh, there's something going on in my department, I guess I should do something. So it's a total falsehood to claim that the minister in this government did anything. They didn't do anything till it was in the public. And I'd like the member to comment on that.
The Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The conflict of interest, I think we should first thank the whistleblower for making it public. I certainly appreciate it. Thankfully, we have a whistleblower protection act that was passed, and we need more whistleblowers in various government and even arm's length organizations wherever corruption takes place. It should not happen. I think it's all very clear that what has been done since then. The Auditor General has looked into it, the reports have been produced, and RCMP, I believe, according to the same member, RCMP has started their investigation soon. At least, if not, it should have been done a bit earlier, but at least now it has started. Let's see how it goes. Let's wait for the logical end.
We have time left for a quick question, 15 or 20 seconds. The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
So to the main question that we have here. The House, by majority vote, not just the Conservatives, have ordered that these documents be produced. On what basis can the government refuse a legal order of the majority of democratically elected members?
The Honourable Member, 15 seconds.
Speaker, I got this small concern. Whenever majority of the members here decide something, is it absolute? That's my question.
Resuming debate, I recognize the Honourable Member for South Kirk Interlake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm glad to join in on today's debate on the question of privilege and the violation of parliamentary privilege by the Liberal government in refusals to produce documents as it relates to the SDTC scandal. Now, we know, and I'll just do a quick recap for those that are just tuning in. We know that the government has taken the Sustainable Development Technology Canada and turned it into a green slush fund for Liberal insiders and friends. The Auditor General did a complete investigation on the governance of SDTC because the whistleblower had come forward. And she found over $390 million worth of contracts were given inappropriately by the board of directors, who all had multiple conflicts of interest. Now, SDTC is a Crown corporation. It's funded fully by the taxpayers of Canada, and every person that serves on that board of directors, including its CEO, is appointed by this government. The Liberal Minister of Industry individually appoints through order in council all of those directors. It should be noted, and as a former chair of the Environment Committee who worked closely with SDTC, that the committee, or that organization, had worked perfectly until 2017. In 2017, the former Minister of Industry, Navdeep Bains, who is no longer a member in this House, went and hired on with Rogers Corporation and making a pile of money doing that. He fired the existing chair and board of SDTC and loaded it up with Liberal friends and insiders, many of them who had already received grants through Sustainable Development Technology Canada. Now, when the Auditor General started doing her research, she found that there was $58 million. We're not talking pennies here. This makes ad scam look like nickel and dime stuff. This is $58 million were awarded on 10 ineligible projects. She found another $334 million on 186 cases of money that was given to projects in which the 9 board members actually had a conflict of interest and never recused themselves from the decision-making process. And that in $58 million worth of projects, almost $59 million worth of projects, that there was no contribution agreement or terms that were ever met. Now, the Auditor General made it clear that the failure of this is upon the Liberal Minister of Industry, who didn't follow through on his oversight and making sure that governance was followed. He did turn a blind eye when they found out that they were actually handing out money to Liberal insiders. And we know that the Minister of the Environment was tied to Cycle Capital, one of the companies that was receiving grants from SDTC. And we know that there was actually a board member on that fund who was also with Cycle Capital, who said that his shares increased by 1,000% after receiving SDTC funding. 1,000%. And the Minister of Environment benefited as well. That is corruption at its core. We also know that yesterday, the RCMP opened up their investigation into the 9 directors identified by the Auditor General in the SDTC Green Slush Fund scandal. But should we at all be surprised by this, Mr. Speaker? You know, this is a Liberal government that has always been ethically challenged. It is scandal-plagued, and the Liberals have a culture of corruption. And all I have to do is go back, and I mentioned ad scam from 2000 to 2004. I was elected in 2004. And we were dealing with the ad scam fallout back then. But we've witnessed it going on and on as we move forward. You know, let's not forget SNC-Lavalin scandal in 2019, where the Prime Minister put pressure on his Justice Minister at the time, Jody Wilson-Raybould, to approve contracts to and also provide a pardon to SNC-Lavalin so that they can tender on and bid on government contracts again. She said no, and the Prime Minister fired Jody Wilson-Raybould because she wouldn't follow his word. She did her job as the Attorney General of Canada in making sure that the law was respected and that these individuals weren't given a free pass for their fraudulent activities in other countries and here in Canada. We know that the Prime Minister was found in violation by the Ethics Commissioner for putting undue pressure on Jody Wilson-Raybould. And of course, that wasn't the first time that he had been found in violation of our ethics rules. It was only the second time, but he's the first Prime Minister in history to actually face an ethics scandal. We look back on the WE scandal of 2020, and here we had the Liberals, again, trying to shovel money into the hands of their friends at the WE charity, you know, over $500,000. Luckily, we were able to get that stopped. But we found out, again, Liberal insiders, including Bill Marneau, who, the former Minister of Finance, was actually tied directly back to the WE charity. His daughter worked for the WE charity, and he was in there advocating not recusing himself from decision-making processes. You look at all the foreign interference that has taken place in the blind eye that has been given by these Liberals on what's happening here. The ArriveScan scam is another one that, again, we have, you know, millions and millions of dollars going in the pockets of 2 guys that we found out later that the ArriveScan app could have been set up for about $154 million. But no, we're talking $54 million plus that was used by these individuals to enrich themselves because they were tied directly to Liberal insiders. And let's not forget about the Winnipeg Lab documents in 2021. In 2020 it started. The House requested and ordered for the production of documents. The government stalled it and blocked it and even took the Speaker to court to try to stop the production of these documents that showed, when we did receive them finally this year, that the two scientists in question were actually operatives for the People's Liberation Army in Beijing, and that viruses were shipped to China, that intel on different vaccines were also shipped over to China, and who knows what other security breaches happened at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg. And the Liberals were too scared to let the public see it. And they were so scared in 2021 that instead of providing those documents and having everything come out through the Supreme Court, they called an election. And that, of course, broke Parliament, and the process stopped. I think some of us over here would actually like these guys to, call an election now, so that we can have an election that stops the documents coming forward, if that's what the Liberals want to do, and Canadians can make the decision on how badly they want to put the Liberals in the penalty box based upon their continued unethical behavior and corruption that they plague their government. Now, I've mentioned that there's been ongoing ethical violations by this government as well. The Prime Minister was found to be guilty for taking a private vacation on Billionaire Island and using unsanctioned aircraft. We know that Bill Marneau was found in the WE scandal, had to resign over it. We know that the Public Safety Minister has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner on 2 different occasions, including awarding family members clam contracts in one of the Crown corporations. He was also found guilty of having his sister-in-law, I believe it was, made as the interim ethics commissioner. Like, how is there any, unbiased there when they're family members? And we thank for interesting family gatherings like Christmas supper. And we also got the trade minister who went and gave her BFF, her campaign manager, contracts directly out of her department, out of her office, without tendering them out at all. And she was found in violation of the ethics rules. And now we have the Liberals obstructing our parliamentary process. They are also obstructing justice. Will they turn these documents over to the RCMP? I doubt it. They're going to claim some sort of cabinet secrecy. But, we have to make sure that the rules of this place, our parliamentary procedure, our Constitution, our Charter, even the British North America Act, is respected. And that's the last thing that these Liberals are doing, Mr. Speaker. Now, they keep claiming, well, this is all about charter rights. And I'll just repeat what the leader of the Conservative Party said yesterday. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms is designed to protect the people from the government, not provide a cover for the government to hide documents from the people. And we have to recognize that the supremacy of our democratic institution, the Parliament of Canada, is the overall legislative body that writes the rules, that writes the laws, and directs our justice system, not the other way around. And the Liberals are always trying to tilt that discussion. So I just want to say this, that if you look at the rules, Standing Order 108(1)A, which gives the power to the House of Commons, to committees, to Parliament, to order the production of papers. And it, just to reiterate it right out of here, the House of Commons Procedures and Practice, 3rd edition, often we call it Bos Gagnon. And as we look at Chapter 3, page 137, and it says this about Parliament. It says the only limitations which could only be self-imposed would be that an inquiry should relate to the subject within the legislative competence of Parliament, particularly where witnesses and documents are required and the penal jurisdiction of Parliament is contemplated. This dovetails with the right of each House of Parliament to summon and compel the attendance of all persons within the limits of their jurisdiction. It goes on to say, the power to send for persons, papers, and records has been delegated by the House of Commons to its committees in the standing orders. It is well established that Parliament has the right to order any and all documents to be laid before it which it believes are necessary for its information. The power to call for persons, papers, and records is absolute. It's absolute. And the Liberals here continue to avoid, dither, delay, deflect, rather than comply with an order of the House. And then we know, Mr. Speaker, based upon the Speaker's decision, when he came to the conclusion that this is a prima facie question of privilege that has been established, and that's what we're in here debating today and have been all week. Because in it, he said, the procedural precedents and authorities are abundantly clear. The House has the undoubted right to order the production of any and all documents from any entity or individual it deems necessary to carry out its duties. And here we have a majority of duly elected honourable members from across the country that are calling on the government to deliver. And I wonder if we're going to see the Liberals go and try to block this process again, either by taking the Speaker back to court because they do not respect Parliament, or are they going to prorogue and stop all processes again? Possibly. That's something that we're all wondering about. Or if they really think that this should be something that the people of Canada should have a say on, let's call an election. And then we can talk about things like the carbon tax and how it's impacting and hurting Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We can talk about how their out-of-control policies and hug-a-thug have created crime and chaos on our streets, the worst that we've ever seen. We can talk about how the housing crisis is making it impossible for young Canadians to achieve the Canadian dream of owning their own home. And we can talk about how the reckless spending is breaking our country, driving up inflation, and hurting employment right across this country. Never mind, productivity is on the downturn, that we are now making 50% less, or the Americans are making 50% more than we are. You know, that to me is troubling, to say the least, because when they came to power, the financial situation in this country was strong. Canadians were making more money in the middle class than what Americans were, and now we have fallen so far back because of the uncreative and negating policies that have hurt Canadians all over our country. Now, we know that when you look at some of these situations, and I just got to find my papers here, this all came to light because of a whistleblower who's been at committee, and I just want to read some of their quotes onto the record here. And this one, I think, is a couple here that are really important. It says, first of all, the true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. By the Liberals themselves, Mr. Speaker, and we hear it here all the time, that they are not at all trying to comply with the Auditor General report or what the Industry Committee has said. They have not tried to comply with this order to produce the papers that are so necessary in getting down to the bottom of what happened here and how their friends and Liberal insiders are getting rich while the rest of us continue to get poorer. Goes on to say, I think the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they'd rather protect the wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with a situation like this SDTC and the public sphere. So again, instead of bringing this out in the open, you know, we want to talk about transparency. We know that sunlight is the best disinfectant, so let the sun shine in. You know, we'll open up the louvers. You know, maybe we can get it down here, and we'll actually have some actual truth and honesty coming from this Liberal government. So, Madam Speaker, you know, I look at this and you know, the whistleblower goes on. I know the federal government, like the minister, has continued saying there was no criminal intent and nothing was found, but I think the committee would agree that they're not to be trusted on this situation. I would happily agree to whatever the findings are by the RCMP, but I would say that I wouldn't trust that there isn't any criminality unless the RCMP is given full authority to investigate. And as we know now, the RCMP is going to do their job and going to get down to the bottom of this. You know, when you look at this scandal, you know, SDTC had their hands on about $100 million a year of taxpayer money to hand out to help new startup organizations, companies, bring in new sustainable type projects, new technologies, and help Canadians with bringing in some of these new technologies to deal with everything from wastewater to greenhouse gas emissions to new software programs that will help reduce waste in our homes. And yet, because of the political interference that we saw from Navdeep Bains when he was Minister of Industry, by the Order in Council appointments that were made through him by this Prime Minister and his Liberal cabinet, that we're seeing individuals come in and ultimately enrich themselves. The key problem in all this is that the SDTC executives, when they were put in as Liberal insiders, decided instead of helping out other companies, they decided to enrich themselves. They decided to help their own companies and grant themselves their own government funds, which is a complete violation and criminality of proper governance. And the Minister of Industry decided to willfully turn a blind eye, and the Liberals have been trying to cover this up ever since. So, Madam Speaker, I don't think any of us are surprised that we're here again, having to try to convince the government to come clean, to produce the documents, allow Parliament to do its work that it's elected to do, and for them to be held to account. Anything else that we're seeing here is simply called a cover-up.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And what is very, very clear is that for the Conservative Party of Canada, this is nothing but a game. And that is the truth. You know, even if you listen to what the member opposite is saying, you know, his virtual at his conclusions, he says, well, let's just call the election. And then he went with the 4 slogans or the 4 bumper stickers. Madam Speaker, the issue here before us is to allow it to go to Procedure and House Affairs Committee. Instead of that, the Conservatives want to filibuster it. The issue in terms of the content is if we ignore what the RCMP and the Auditor General have said, that they are highly concerned about the tactic that the Conservative Party is using, Madam Speaker, then I could understand why it is that they would be pushing for it. There is no justification. Let the Standing Committee deal with it. Why play the game? The people that are paying the price of this Conservative game is Canadians.
For South Creek Interlake Eastman.
Madam Speaker, what we have is a member from Winnipeg North, once again, up here, working as the government's mouthpiece to deflect, delay, dither, and essentially trying to make false arguments. The RCMP and the Auditor General has never said anything of the sort, naming any party. You know, that's what is complete misinformation coming from the member. We need to also understand that Parliament is the supreme power in this country. And as the rules state, as our Constitution dictates, there is nothing that we undertake here will be any way impeding an investigation done by the RCMP. I'm glad to see the RCMP is investigating. You know, one of our slogans, you want to talk about the slogan? One of the slogans is stop the crime. Right. And here we have the Liberals being complicit in a crime and helping up with the cover-up of the illegal activities of SDTC Board of Directors.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neches-Témiscouata-les-Basques. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened closely to my colleague's speech. Our party agrees with the question of privilege today in that we believe that the government needs to be more transparent and give us the information so we can take decisions and have more accountability from this government. That is our role. However, when I listen to my colleague, the way he talks, you'd think that the Conservative Party has never had any problems, any lack of integrity, but we should remember that the motto of Quebec is, I remember. But we should remember that the Conservative Party, when it was in power, well, we know that in 2009, a former Canadian diplomat who had information about Afghan detainees who might be tortured, do we remember that? We know that this was important, not negligible at all, and yet the Harper government at the time refused to grant access to documents. And there was a question of privilege, like today, but the Harper government refused to have an independent inquiry, and the Speaker of the House at the time finally authorized that the documents be transferred because everything had been redacted. So I'd like my colleague to explain, why is it that when the Conservatives are in opposition, they claim to be masters of transparency, and yet how can it be that Canadians can trust them, given their disastrous record?
Well, it's interesting to listen to a colleague from the Bloc defend Liberal corruption. To answer his question on the Afghan detainees, because I was here during that time, so the government does have the power to limit access on things that affect national security and national defense. The SDTC has nothing at all to do with anything that, other than Liberal embarrassment. So on the Afghan detainee thing, we did put in place a process that allowed members to actually look at those secret documents and report back if they saw anything there that fulfilled any of the allegations that were being made by other parties. And you know, Stephen Dion and Lori Hahn spent months going through thousands and thousands of pages of classified top secret documents on the activity of the Canadian Armed Forces as it referred to Afghan detainees, and they came back with a nil report. There was no evidence other than allegations that were made by partisan interests. I would also say that the rules are clear on this as well, that in Bosque-Gagnon, that the House, as well as the Speaker, will recognize when there is information that could hurt the overall national security of the country. So I would say that the argument being brought forward from my friend in the Bloc doesn't hold water.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Bruce Grey Owen Sound.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So I got a comment real quick from my honourable colleague, because it was kind of rich, I thought, with the parliamentary secretary talking about filibustering when he's been up speaking on this very same motion and taking up time in the debate. But my question to the member from Selkirk Innerlake Eastman is that I talked to my father, so many Canadians that are so worried about this lack of transparency, this waste of taxpayers' dollars, and they just want to know where their money is, and that they're so tired of the corruption with the current government. And I'd like the member just to comment on how important it is to restore trust in our democratic institutions, in our government, and the importance of that. And by covering things up, this government is continuing to tear down our democratic institutions.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Innerlake Eastman.
Madam Speaker, I thank my friend from Bruce Grey Owen Sound for his question. And, you know, even the Deputy Minister of Industry is also saying that this money that was taken, potentially criminally, but illegitimately, by the Liberal insiders at SDTC should be paid back. We haven't heard that from the Liberals at all. You know, and on the issue of transparency, the Liberals, if they want to be transparent, they could turn those documents over today. But no, they would rather sit here. And as you mentioned, you know, the Liberal member from Winnipeg North, who has spoken more words in this chamber than all the rest of us combined, is the biggest person that filibusters in this place. And, you know, as I've said, he has the gift for the gab, but nobody has spoken so much but has said so little.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the really great intervention here today and sort of laying out the timelines of what has occurred in this corruption and in this scandal. And you know what I want to ask the member, and he did touch some of this in his intervention, is with respect to Parliament being supreme. I mean, we do have the will of Parliament, and the government is not fulfilling the will of Parliament. So they're really discounting the authority and the will that us as parliamentarians have given the government direction on. So how does this put question into people's mind as to the functioning of our Parliament when the government is not following the will directed of Parliament?
Member for South and Interlake Eastman.
Well, Madam Speaker, I couldn't agree more than with my colleague and friend from Kelowna Lake Country. You know, Canadians are concerned about transparency. They're concerned about the attack on democratic institutions. And when you have the behavior by the Liberal government of cover-ups, of corruption, and continuing bringing more polarization within this House because they refuse to comply with an order from the Speaker, the democratically elected Speaker of the Democratic House of Commons, of course they're going to question whether or not the House of Commons, our Parliament, our democracy is at risk. And so, again, Madam Speaker, I can't stress this enough, that the Liberals have a choice here. They can either continue to cover up their corruption, they can continue to try to talk this out, but they should actually do the right thing, which is comply with the order of the House so that they aren't found in a violation of privilege. And if they are so concerned about it, turn the question that we'll have and the chance to vote on the prima facie case of privilege into a confidence motion so that we can actually have an election to end this attack on our democratic institutions.
Debate, the Honourable Member for Yorkton Millville.
Thank you, Speaker. I begin my intervention with a quote. "It's hard not to feel disappointed in your government when every day there's a new scandal." Speaker, these are the prophetic words of the Honourable Member for Papineau, our current Prime Minister of Canada. And how true those words ring today. After 9 years of scandal, corruption, and Liberal entitlement, the business of the House has been put on hold to discuss a new scandal of monumental proportions, the Green Slush Fund. This government didn't like the fact that the former chair of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, was being publicly critical of their agenda. So they fired him and replaced him with one of their friends. This replacement was known to the government as holding blatant conflicts, as she had interests in companies receiving funding from CDTC. The PMO, PCO, and the minister were warned about these conflicts and the risks involved, but they appointed her anyway. The new chair went on to create an environment where conflicts of interest are tolerated and managed by board directors. What ensued was the creation of a slush fund for Liberal insiders. The Auditor General found the SDTC gave out $390 million taxpayer dollars in inappropriate contracts. This included $58 million to 10 projects that couldn't account for an environmental benefit or the development of green technology. In 180 cases, it included $334 million to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. All the while, senior Industry Canada officials witnessed these conflicts but did not intervene. The Auditor General herself placed the blame directly on the industry minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were being given out. The minister was going further than that. He was actively covering up the existence of these shady deals. Where he failed, this side of the House attempted to deliver some form of accountability for taxpayer money. Before adjourning for the summer, this House adopted a motion calling for documents related to SDTC to be turned over to the RCMP for review. At no point in the motion did it say that the instructions were optional. At no point did it instruct the government to redact information. And as you know, Speaker, the House enjoys the absolute and unbound power to order the production of documents, period. You found that this government's refusal to properly comply with the House order constituted a breach of privilege. That's our government. This wasn't a simple mistake by this NDP Liberal government. It was a calculated maneuver to avoid the discovery of any potential criminal activity that may have occurred under this government's watch. The SDTC whistleblower had suggested as much. They admitted that the Auditor General's investigation only scraped the surface, and if her investigation was focused on the real intent of those transactions, of course they would find criminal activity. And Speaker, thank goodness, breaking news yesterday, the RCMP has announced that they will be investigating, and of course they have full authority to substantiate any criminal activities that occurred within this organization. The fact that the NDP Liberals have tried to cover them up and prevent Parliament from shining a light on these transactions is a serious, serious indictment of their disdain for our democratic system. For the sake of our country and our reputation around the world, I wish the Green Slush Fund was the only case of corruption and disrespect for Parliament. Now it's been two speakers who have ordered the government to produce documents requested by this House, by this Parliament, and on both occasions, Liberals have failed to do so. The former Speaker found that the Liberals breached parliamentary privilege when they refused to produce House-ordered documents regarding the transfer of Ebola and Henipah viruses from the Winnipeg lab to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and the subsequent revocation of security clearances of 2 Chinese nationals. For the Prime Minister, the Conservatives wanted to know why 2 scientists with deep connections to the Chinese military were even able to obtain high-level Canadian security clearances and conduct work with dangerous viruses. What was this government's reaction? They thumbed their noses at Parliament. Conservatives ensured that the President of the Public Health Agency was called to the bar of the House of Commons to be reprimanded by the Speaker, something that this Parliament has not had happen in over 100 years. Also related to the pandemic was when the Prime Minister decided to use it for his own partisan gain. Canadians did not want an election in 2021, but he decided to call one anyways, based on differences of opinion between the Liberals and Conservatives on how the pandemic could be managed, and he thought he could wedge Canadians. For the Prime Minister, it was his way or the highway. The Prime Minister rolled the dice, and Canadians said no way. He failed to get a majority, but destroyed so many people's lives in the process. He verbally abused, wrongfully accused, and denies culpability for the physical, the mental, and financial harms inflicted on Canadians. He realized, actually, that he couldn't make COVID vaccines his supposed ticket to a majority government if our Canadian Armed Forces members were not fully vaccinated, and so ordered our serving members, who were put through a horrific process of mandates, restrictions, and punishment, which left our ranks depleted, our men and women in uniform demoralized, and many seriously injured. The ramifications of his decisions will be felt in our armed forces for years to come. Yeah. Like a mantra, Liberals continually said over on that side of the floor that every decision that they were making throughout the pandemic was rooted in science, and they depended on medical professionals because they themselves were not. But here too, they went over the heads of all parliamentarians, over the head of the Speaker, and even the professional House of Commons nurse by denying members of this House the ability to do their jobs on behalf of their constituents in this place. When it came to vaccination status and precinct access, they pushed aside the medical professional, the nurse. The Speaker ruled that she was the only one with a professional medical authority to make public health decisions for members of Parliament and House of Commons staff. The Speaker also ruled that the Board of Internal Economy had overstepped its mandate in its vaccine requirements in this place. And that is when this Prime Minister, for overt personal political purposes, blatantly overrode the scientifically supported public health decisions of the House medical professional and took his own Liberal Speaker to court for daring to do his job without partisan political interference. And then there's a time I'll never forget, the first debate that I participated in that sought to remove the government's accountability to this House. It was in regard to the environmental framework. The bill sought to give sweeping power to the minister and accountability to an advisory board. Today, with the Green Slush Fund, we're certainly hearing how good that works out for us when one minister has a little bit too much of himself. Somewhat alarmed over this, I questioned the freshly minted member from West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country, about this board. Like, what was it going to look like? How many would be on it? Where were they going to come from? And what would their credentials be to give Canadians confidence? What would their mandate be? How long would they serve? Questions like that. Well, the member could not wait to rise and say, the board's already been chosen. With debate barely initiated in this House, the deed was already done. Speaker, from the Green Slush Fund to this government's management of the pandemic, to the obsession with appointing oversight bodies with little or no accountability to Parliament, these Liberals have a very unhealthy tendency to take more and more rights and responsibilities away from opposition in the House and giving more and more power to ministers and outside governing bodies that are not accountable to this place. In September of 2016, within his very first year of winning the incredible honor and the privilege to be first servant, Prime Minister, first servant to Canadians, this Prime Minister said, and I'm quoting him here, this is at the beginning of serving this place and serving Canadians, quote, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada," and he concluded that he sees Canada as the first post-national state. I don't think he went to Canadians on that. These are all ideologies, behaviors, conscious decisions that are made by this government, made by this Prime Minister, to obscure and deny the depth of their political corruption. These are decisions that are made with no regard for what is best for Canada. Parliament is just an inconvenience for this Prime Minister, and it always has been. Only common sense Conservatives will end the NDP Liberal corruption. We will end their attack on Canada's sovereignty, on our institutions, on our way of life, on our democracy and rule of law, and we, on behalf of Canadians, the Conservative Party of Canada, will get the answers that Canadians deserve. They are asking for answers, and they want them. This member from Papineau and every member of this NDP Liberal government has absolutely failed in their duty to be accountable to Canadians, and Canadians have had enough. We keep hearing about, well, we need to listen to Canadians. Believe me, Madam Speaker, we have. They only have one thing that is absolutely top of mind, and that is to remove this Prime Minister and his corrupt government. Taxes are up, way up, Costs are up, way up to where Canadians cannot afford the basic things in life, and they are struggling. Crime is up, like over 100% in so many areas. What they are doing to this country is so regressive. It's regressive. It's not progressive. It is regressive. It is destroying our nation. And Canadians are saying their time is up. The vast majority of Canadians want a carbon tax election, and for them, we'll bring it home.
Here, here.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I get it. The member personally doesn't like the Prime Minister. And if you listen to what it is that she's talking about, she's using the issue of so-called corruption or scandals as a way to express a great deal of frustration that the member has towards the Prime Minister. But let me remind the member that Stephen Harper, and I made reference to this earlier today, when you talk about scandals, Stephen Harper and the Conservative government takes it by a country mile. We can talk about the anti-terrorism scandal, we can talk about the Phoenix scandal, the G8 spending scandal, the ETS scandal, the F-35 scandal, the Senate scandal, the multiple election scandals. These are all things in which her holier-than-thou Conservative Party, with their leader, Stephen Harper, were deeply engaged in. And unfortunately, it wasn't until the latter couple of years that Stephen Harper actually came up with the Ethics Commissioner, because he was so pathetic when he was the Prime Minister that he had to try to justify that he does have ethics. That's one of the reasons why he brought it into place a couple of years before he actually left, or I should say he was kicked out of office. I'm wondering if she has any thoughts in terms of how unethical the Conservative government was, and how Stephen Harper drove the economy, in particular our manufacturing industry, into the economy, and so many other things that motivated Canadians to kick Stephen Harper out of office.
The Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, I'm a mom, and I'm a grandma. It's awesome, isn't it? It is. But you know what? I can guarantee that everyone in this house that when one of my kids was out of line, I didn't let them try and redirect, because this government is in power. And I can assure the member across the floor, every Canadian is hypersensitive now and hyper-aware to the shenanigans of this government. I know that in this place that we can't say that people lie. I think that is the one thing that we will never truly represent Canadians in this place when that is allowed. And to the extent that it happens, it means that debate in this House is not real. And what came out of that member's mouth was not accurate. But what they are doing clearly is, because they are before their own speaker, they are being challenged by the RCMP left and right and being investigated because they are doing things untruthfully. When you can stand in this place and say those things, I know that it is just reinforcing in the hearts and minds of Canadians that this Liberal government has got to go.
The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my colleague for the speech. There was a request that documents be given to the RCMP, but the RCMP has the ability to seek information and receive it if it wishes in the context of investigations. But this House only has power through the chair or through the recommendations of committees. The role that we have as opposition MPs is different from the role of the RCMP. Our role is to hold the government to account. Our role is to get information for the public, but our role is different from anything in a criminal context where the RCMP could be involved. So could my colleague speak about the importance of political parties in the House, and also about the fact that the government is not currently giving us what we need in order to do our role properly?
Yes, we have the privilege and the responsibility in this place to call for those documents, to demand those documents. And that is what we are doing here in requiring this government to stop digging in its heels and pretend that they don't have to respond the way that every other government has needed to respond in these kinds of circumstances. I'm sorry, but there's no way that we should ever let up on them being required to do what they have been demanded to do by this House.
Honourable Member for Windsor West.
In April of 2010, then Speaker Peter Milliken ruled with regards to the Afghan detainee documents that the Harper government would not release at that time. We had a series of different interventions from diplomats and other whistleblowers and so forth, and Parliament then had a motion pass, and then the Speaker ruled on that in 2010. To my colleague, why was there not an attempt to correct this behavior from the Conservative government at that time under Harper, so we didn't have to relive what we're reliving right now? Because if we actually would have followed through with recommendations, and we would have followed through with the path forward that the then House of Commons wanted to go, and the Speaker was ruling by Milliken, we wouldn't be in this situation. So we're here. And what took place on the Conservative benches from that time when we actually had the Milliken response and decision to then the end of their government record and not cleaning up this fiasco where we can't get the documents that they actually seek today, that we seek and the Bloc seeks as well?
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Well, I thank the member for the question. However, I know that it was already asked, and my fellow colleague who serves as our Shadow Minister for Defence gave a very accurate response to that question. And when it comes to our armed forces, believe me, it is very important in my heart and mind as well. And let's face the facts. An election was run on that issue, and we won.
The Honourable Member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm going to ask a question to put a little more detailed flavor on this so people watching understand. The handpicked chair of SDTC, Annette Verschuren, handpicked by the Prime Minister, was put in place after the previous chair complained about the government. She tried to get $6.8 million for the Verschuren Centre at Cape Breton University from the slush fund, which she chaired. The investment committee said, oh no, that's a conflict. But guess what the investment committee said? The investment committee said, we'll use the employees here to help you get the money elsewhere. So the chair actually used the employees of the Green Slush Fund to get a further $10 million for the Verschuren Centre from Industry Canada and ACOA. And that's the least of the corruption. But that's a very specific instance of what these Liberals are trying to cover up with their hand-picked chair. So I'd like to ask the member what she thinks about that and why they're trying to prevent those documents from going to the RCMP.
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville.
Well, I thank my colleague for the question and apologize to some degree for not focusing as much as perhaps I should have on the Green Slush Fund, because it is a story unto itself that shows just the depth of inappropriateness, I don't know which words to use, to describe what these people are willing to do to fill their own pockets and the pockets of those that are part of their elite group. It is inappropriate. We need to do what is right in this place. Canadians are sick and tired of this government not caring about Canadians, as our Prime Minister has said. It's all about him. It's all about their decisions about the future of our country, and they are destroying it with their own criminal activities, and it's beyond the pale. There's nowhere to put it.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Parkland. Oh, sorry. Sir. Yes. Sturgeon River Parklands, yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak, Madam Speaker. And I know some members of this House will remember, those who were here in 2004, my former mentor and predecessor, Member Parliament John Williams, who was the chair of the Public Accounts Committee during the ad scam scandal. And I know everyone will be very sad to hear that John sadly passed away this past summer. However, John always told me in our many meetings together that one of the things that separates developed, successful countries like Canada has been is having accountability. For him, that was just That was his go-to word, accountability. And I wonder if the member can talk to us about what happens when we don't have accountability, when governments are not held accountable. In fact, John founded an organization called Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption so that we could bring accountability across the world to all of these nations where corruption was rampant. Can the member tell us what happens when parliamentarians don't take a stand and hold governments accountable when they're doing corrupt things? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member for Yorkton Melville, very brief answer.
Okay, well, I really do appreciate the comments and the question. The truth of the matter is, if we do not hold these people to account, Canadians will suffer even more than they already are.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Regina Westcott.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. What a sad state of affairs we've seen this week from the Liberals. Here we are engaging in what should be a serious conversation about a pressing issue, only to hear the members opposite say, but what about them? They did something worse. The old political tactic of whataboutism, the ultimate escape hatch for avoiding accountability. It's become the go-to response by the Liberals during the course of this debate. Let's step back and look at the big picture. A government gets caught red-handed in a scandal. It's clear, undeniable, and the public deserves an explanation. What happens next? Well, we don't get an apology or even a hint of responsibility. Instead, we get a well-rehearsed, but what about the other party? They try to change the subject to someone else's wrongdoing, as if two wrongs somehow make a right. Whataboutism is the political equivalent of the schoolyard comeback, I know you are, but what am I? How childish, Madam Speaker. This attitude of avoiding the tough questions by pointing fingers elsewhere is nothing new. It's been happening for years across all political spectrums. But under this Liberal government, it seems to have sunk to a new low, a strategy deployed to muddy the waters and confuse the public. Why talk about real problems when you can play the blame game instead? Why address policy failures when you can just drag your opponents into the mud with you? We stand here today, once again, facing this Liberal government that will do everything humanly possible to avoid transparency. The Liberal government's pattern of withholding crucial documents and hiding from parliamentary scrutiny is not just a betrayal of democracy, it's an outright assault on the accountability that every Canadian citizen deserves. The present case involving Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or the Green Slush Fund, serves as only the latest example of a long series of maneuvers by the Liberals to avoid accountability. Here we have a Speaker of the House ruling that the Liberal government violated the powers of the House by refusing to provide documents related to this fund. This blatant refusal to cooperate with Parliament represents an alarming trend of deception. What are they hiding? What could possibly be so damning in these documents that they would rather violate the very principles of parliamentary oversight than let the truth be seen? The arrogance of this behavior cannot be overstated. Time and time again, when faced with tough questions, the Liberal government shifts the goalposts, stonewalls, or when absolutely cornered, throws up their hands and gives vague, non-committal responses. They've forgotten they serve the Canadian people, not their own political interests. What makes this evasion all the more ridiculous is the government's attempts to put a green spin on it. Sure, they grossly mismanaged public funds to shovel money to their friends. Sure, they were involved in corruption, but at least it was green corruption. This seems to be their argument. At least it was some nice environmentalist who got away with the cash. The absurdity of this argument is lost on no one, yet somehow the Liberals seem to believe that this passes as an acceptable response. And yet, despite how laughable and immature the Liberals' whataboutism is, they are unrelenting in their use of it. We have heard Liberal speaker after Liberal speaker stand up this week and waste the House's time with history lessons and other distractions that have nothing to do with the issue we are dealing with here and now. Their response has turned this debate into a competition of who did worse rather than who can do better. This attitude is not just disappointing, it's dangerous. It promotes a culture of deflection where no one is held accountable because, well, someone else did something bad too. It undermines trust in our leaders and institutions because it suggests that as long as someone else is doing worse, then nothing needs to change. What a sad state of affairs for the Liberal Party, Madam Speaker. The party that waltzed into government with fine slogans about sunny ways and running the most transparent government in history now hides and cowers behind the excuse that, well, at least the other guys were worse. What makes that attitude so much sadder, Madam Speaker, is that it's not even true. By any metric you want to choose, by taxpayers' dollars wasted, or by the length of time these schemes were running, the number of ethics violations incurred, by any metric you can come up with, the level of corruption by this Liberal government is in a shameful class all by itself. When this government first came to power, one of their slogans was, "Canada is back." A slogan that reflects the typical entitled Liberal Party attitude that the nation of Canada and the Liberal Party are the same thing, and the Liberals are Canada's natural governing party. Mr. Speaker, if you go through, Madam Speaker, if you go through life with that attitude, then it becomes easy to rationalize stealing from the public purse. Why not use the taxpayers' money for your own benefit? To put it another way, as far as the Liberals are concerned, the taxpayers' money is the Liberals' money. Nowhere has the Liberal attitude of entitlement been more obvious than in the present issue of the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. So let's take a closer look at this most recent incarnation of Liberal greed, corruption, and insider cronyism. Sustainable Development Technology Canada, or SDTC, is a program that was supposed to be about protecting our environment, fostering innovation, and creating a sustainable future. But what has it become? It has become the Liberals' Green Slush Fund. The Auditor General's report, released earlier this year, is a damning indictment of SDTC and the entire Liberal government's mismanagement of public funds. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. A staggering $58 million was handed out to ineligible projects. What were these projects? Some of them didn't develop a single new technology. Others made outlandish claims about their environmental benefits that couldn't stand up to the slightest scrutiny. Yet they were funded anyway. And let's not forget, Madam Speaker, that the Auditor General looked at only a sample of SDTC transactions. A sample. She looked at roughly half of the transactions and found that 82% of them were conflicted. We can easily surmise that the remaining cases were just as conflicted and that sums of money involved were hundreds of millions of dollars more. This is about more than just paperwork errors or poor oversight. This is about a culture of corruption that has seeped into the highest levels of this Liberal government. This is about a Prime Minister who promised transparency but instead gave us secrecy. A Prime Minister who said that his government would work for all Canadians, but instead has set up a system where only his friends and Liberal insiders get ahead. Liberal insiders at the trough. That is what this program is all about. How could this happen? How could a program designed to fund innovation and environmental protection be so utterly corrupted? Unraveling those questions starts by looking at the person at the center of this scandal, Annette Verschuren, the chair of the SDTC board, who oversaw much of this disaster. A person who voted to give millions of dollars to her own companies. Why would she not recuse herself? Someone with such a long history of corporate governance must have had at least some glancing knowledge of the concept of conflict of interest. The ethics commissioner himself has called out this blatant conflict of interest for years, but unfortunately it went unpunished. We now know that Verschuren's company and our store directly benefited from these funds. And this is not a one-off event. It's a symptom of a system that has been so utterly compromised by greed and self-interest. When whistleblowers tried to bring these issues to light, what did they get? Well, some of them got fired, some of them got silenced, and some of them got a toxic workplace environment where honesty is punished and corruption is rewarded. Madam Speaker, let's review some of the whistleblower testimony from committee. Quote, just as I was always confident that the Auditor General would confirm the financial mismanagement at SDTC, I remain equally confident that the RCMP will substantiate the criminal activities that occurred within the organization, unquote. In other statements, the whistleblower said, quote, the true failure of the situation stands at the feet of our current government, whose decision to protect wrongdoers and cover up their findings over the last 12 months is a serious indictment of how our democratic systems and institutions are being corrupted by political interference. It should never have taken 2 years for the issues to reach this point. And what should have been a straightforward process turned into a bureaucratic nightmare that allowed SDTC to continue wasting millions of dollars and abusing countless employees over the last year, unquote. And finally, the whistleblower went on to say, I think that the current government is more interested in protecting themselves and protecting the situation being a public nightmare, and they would rather protect wrongdoers and financial mismanagement than have to deal with the situation like this SDTC and the public sphere, unquote. Well, isn't that the truth, Madam Speaker? Isn't that exactly what we've seen and heard from Liberal members opposite with their incessant whataboutism? One of the pieces of testimony from the Ethics Committee from last year that I found quite puzzling came from Doug McConaughey, an Assistant Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, or ISED for short, who saw the handling of the whistleblower complaints against SDTC. In a recorded conversation with a whistleblower, Mr. McConaughey stated, quote, there's a lot of sloppiness and laziness. There is some outright incompetence. And, you know, the situation is just kind of untenable at this point. And in the recorded conversation, he went on to say, and I think this comment coming from a senior, experienced civil servant was especially relevant. He said, quote, it was free money. That is almost a sponsorship scandal level kind of giveaway, unquote. But then, in the committee, after the Liberal bosses had talked to him and provided him with his new talking points, Mr. McConaughey made the following statement that I found both surprising and sad. Quote, I was too transparent, too trusting, and I deeply regret any impact this has had on the government SDTC, and ISED, unquote. Too transparent. Too transparent. Yes, apparently by the standards set by the Liberal Party, the government should be transparent only to a point. Their attitude seems to be, well, we'll make a bit of a show of being honest and open, but let's not get carried away. Let's be clear. This is not just an accident. This is not a bureaucratic mistake. This is an apparatus of greed built to serve Liberal insiders, their friends, and their allies. And what about the real innovators? What about the hard-working Canadians who play by the rules, who try to get ahead through hard work and good ideas? They are left out in the cold, watching as Liberal friends get their snouts in the government trough. Madam Speaker, since its inception, SDTC has received $2.1 billion in federal funding. Under the present Liberal government, the most recent agreement outlined $722 million in funding through 2028. But instead of using that money to build cleaner, greener futures, they've used it to line the pockets of their wealthy friends and business associates. Madam Speaker, at the end of the day, after all of their carbon taxes and all of their anti-oil and anti-gas policies and all of their environmental rhetoric, the only thing that is greener is the wallets of their friends. Let's go over those numbers again to try to keep things in perspective. $58 million that we know about given to ineligible projects. $334 million that we know about in blatant conflicts of interests. Those are the facts, Madam Speaker. The shameful, appalling, caught red-handed, hand-in-the-cookie-jar facts. Yet, we have not even heard a single Liberal member across the aisle offer to the Canadian people anything that even remotely resembles an apology. Not so much as a syllable of accountability or regret, just an endless stream of excuses, evasions, and whataboutism. Madam Speaker, this is the very definition of Liberal insiders at the trough. This is how they operate and think. They take care of their own. They make sure that Liberals get rich while ordinary Canadians struggle to make ends meet. And then, when they get caught, what do? Almost like a reflex, they bring up one or two mistakes made by Stephen Harper from 12 or 15 years ago. Madam Speaker, Canadians deserve better. The Liberals' response has been unacceptable, especially when we are talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of taxpayers' money thrown away on projects that should have never been funded in the first place. This green slush fund scandal is about more than just money. It's about integrity. It's about a Liberal government that has lost its way, that has forgotten who they work for. We need real accountability. We need a government that works for the people, not for the insiders, not for the lobbyists, and not for the rich and well-connected. The Liberals will tell you that this is all just a misunderstanding, that these issues are being fixed. But we've heard that before. We heard it after the SNC-Lavalin scandal, we heard it after the We Charity scandal, we heard it after the ArriveCan app scandal, and we are hearing it now. This is a pattern of corruption and greed, a pattern of Liberal insiders at the trough taking whatever they can get and leaving the rest of us to pay the bill. Madam Speaker, Canadians have had enough. It's time for a change. It's time for a government that puts Canadians first, that makes Canada work for people who work, a government that believes in fairness, transparency, and accountability. We cannot allow this culture of corruption to continue. We cannot allow the Liberals to keep putting their friends and insiders ahead of the Canadian people. Let's send a message to this government that enough is enough. Let's take back control of our tax dollars. Let's demand accountability. And let's make sure that the next time there's a program like SDTC, it's working for the people, not for insiders at the trough. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, putting the numerous false accusations or misinformation and the amount of rhetoric that's in that speech, whoever wrote it, I have no idea, but no doubt they'll get a gold star from the Conservative spin doctors. I can tell you that when this issue first came to being, it was the Liberal government that addressed the arm's length. Arm's length means it's not the government that runs the fund. The government provides the fund. An arm's length group administers the program. And when the government found that there were serious allegations, 2 internal audits were done. The Auditor General also has done a report on it. The Standing Committee has been looking at it to try to give the impression this is all about Liberal insiders and corrupt Liberals is a bunch of, and I'll let you fill in the blank, Madam Speaker. And I think it does a disservice for those individuals that would actually be listening and believing the type of things that you were saying on the record. My question is, the motion is saying that we should grab everything we have and give it directly to the RCMP. That is very much something new to the House of Commons. Because we have the power, we can do that. Just because we have the power doesn't mean we have the right to walk on the Charter of Rights of individuals. Shame on the member.
Gina Wascott.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. I didn't quite hear a question in there, so let me just say that the oldest trick in the book is to set up an arm's-length agency and appoint all of your friends and insiders to the board who all have conflicts of interest, and then that gives politicians the ability to say, well, it wasn't me, it was all my friends whom I appointed. As for the second part of the honourable member's statement, good people cannot stand idly by and let all of this corruption and criminal activity go on. When you have honest, hard-working civil servants who come to work every day and do an honest day's work for an honest day's pay, and they see all of these corrupt Liberals helping themselves to taxpayers' money, they cannot...
Yeah, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, he's giving the hand gesture all these corrupt Liberals. I can tell the member I am not corrupt, nor do I believe any of my Liberal colleagues are corrupt.
No, it's... let's start slinging from one side to the other because that doesn't arrange the situation. But absolutely, I would advise the honourable member to avoid calling the benches Liberal, all of them. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I can assure the honourable member my hand gestures were not directed at him personally. I do get a bit animated with my hands sometime. But where was I? Oh, yeah, so honest people can't stand by and let criminal activity happen. When there are criminal activities, the police have to be called in. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Bay James EU. Madam Speaker, we remember in 2005, the AG produced a report that was devastating about accountability in foundations, and the government even transferred rather 9 billion to 15 foundations, including SDTC. It ended up being a cancer, and the government, sorry, I'm having a hard time pronouncing this because it's crazy, they are treating public funds like monopoly money. It doesn't make sense, Madam Speaker. So if you become a government, what will you do to avoid these type of strategies and to ensure you're vigilant with respect to what's going on right now? I'd like to remind the honourable member, I can't become a government if she's speaking through me. The honourable member for Regina. I'd like to thank my colleague from the bloc for her question. And I have to say that, yes, of course, it's a big problem that people in this country have lost trust in their government and in our democratic institutions. and I think it's a real problem that needs to be improved. But the first thing to do is to change the government, and that's why we need a new Conservative government after the next elections. Thank you.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And there are many accusations flying across the floor, and one may forgive me that I want to not say it's necessarily an epithet, but I'm trying to figure out if Annette Verschuren, if we can find any evidence that she's in fact tied to Liberals or was a Liberal or is ever a Liberal. I've gone through Wikipedia. I've gone through everything I can find about her. She was obviously, and I do know as a Cape Bretoner, I won't say former, once a Caper, always a Caper, that she was really highly regarded as a Cape Breton girl who was the daughter of Dutch immigrants, worked hard on a farm all her life. But I looked through her political connections. She was named by Stephen Harper to help in the Economic Advisory Council in the financial crisis of 2008. She was awarded Canadian Business Hall of Fame in 2019. She was also an advisor to Brian Mulroney. She seems to have been on all sides of the political fences, and she was also on the board of directors of Natural Resources Limited, of course, an oil sands company, which also received money from STDC. She's on the board of the Ontario Energy Agency. Clearly, she didn't understand the concept, and this is mind-boggling for someone with that kind of business career. As chair of the board of SDTC, she didn't seem to understand that she was in flagrant conflict of interest. There's no question about that. So my question, and her organization, I heard it thrown around that they got millions. As far as I can see on the record, it's unacceptable if they got a nickel while she was chair of the board, mind you, but they got about $200,000 from SDTC. My point is here, she's not without getting punished in all this. Her reputation is in tatters. Still, one wants to know more. But I don't see this as a case where a board set up under Jean Chrétien, run under Stephen Harper with the same board structure, is suddenly the entire thing is now condemned as a Liberal slush fund. It certainly was mismanaged. She was chair of the board when flagrant conflict of interest occurred, but I don't see anything that ties her specifically to one party or another.
Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and I would say all the more reason to hand these documents over to the RCMP so they can do a thorough investigation to get to the bottom of this. But I would say that someone as experienced as this individual should have known better and should have known that there was a conflict of interest and should have recused herself from the situation. And if she didn't, there should have been the oversight in place to make sure that did indeed happen. And that is why it is so frustrating when we have a program like this that was, by all accounts, set up with good intentions many years ago to promote research and development into new technologies and environmental solutions. It is so frustrating when all of that goodwill gets thrown out the window and it turns into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Pitt Meadows, Maple Ridge.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Speaking about board members, there is one board member that received, her company, Psycho Capital, received $250 million in contracts. And there is a Liberal minister, actually the Minister for Environment and Climate Change, that was a lobbyist for them and met with the government 25 times the year before getting elected in 2019. So this is of concern to us. I wonder if the member could make a few comments on this. Great question.
The Honourable Member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. And the simple answer is yes. I don't understand how the present Environment Minister could have thought it was possibly acceptable, given his connections in the past to these people and these organizations, for there to be such a lack of oversight and such a high degree of complacency among the individuals involved. So again, all the more reason to hand over all the documents to the RCMP, and all the more reason for there to be a complete and thorough investigation so the people who did wrong are held account, and the people who did nothing wrong are cleared of any wrongdoing. But we cannot have that happen as long as there continues to be stonewalling and a refusal to cooperate with the RCMP. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Very brief question from the Honourable Member for Nepean.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I agree with everything what the member from Saanich Gulf Island said. I just want to ask the member, is he aware that the person at the center of this issue is also a Conservative Party donor?
Member for Regina Wascana.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And the short answer is no. I mean, I have not looked into the past donations of these particular individuals, but I don't feel that I should have to. I feel that this House should hand the matter over to the RCMP and let them get to the bottom of it, as should have been done quite a few days ago.
Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you know, on June 10th, this House passed a motion, a Conservative motion to order the government, SDTC, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, and the Auditor General to table with the Parliamentary Law Clerk within 14 days certain documents that would be transferred to the RCMP. And the Bloc Québécois feels that since the documents were not delivered as requested, this is a breach of privilege. On September 26th, the Speaker gave a ruling saying that the question of privilege has a sufficient basis. And currently this matter to send the issue to the Procedure Committee has been debated in this House since last Friday, which has changed what is debated in the House because this is a priority matter. So our business has been monopolized by this for a week instead of debating legislation. Let me come back to the origins of this. SDTC was actually designed to mismanage public funds. There is a fatal flaw from the very beginning here. SDTC is condemned to engage in wasteful spending. Let me go back to the very beginning. In 1995, after the Quebec referendum, Ottawa was terrified and realized that the federal government was basically absent from Quebecers' lives. So the federal government decided to start engineering things to benefit itself and to the detriment of Quebec. At the time, Paul Martin was the Minister of Finance, and the President of the Treasury Board was Marcel Massé, also a former clerk of the Privy Council. And because he was very familiar with the machinery of state, he decided to change things profoundly to help Ottawa have a lot of financial leeway and to back against the wall. The goal was to ensure that Quebecers would see the federal government as their government, the government they should turn to meet their needs. And the goal here was to change their allegiance from Quebecers to Canadians. Marcel Massé was very clear about this. He said, speaking of Lucien Bouchard, Premier of Quebec at the time, he said, when Bouchard has to cut, we in Ottawa will show that we have the resources to preserve the future of social programs. That's what Marcel Massé said, remarkably enough. And he partially succeeded. The cuts to health and social services transfers, 40% over 3 years, forced the government of Quebec to cut in its turn. We all remember the layoffs, the massive layoffs of nurses. The health network never completely recovered. The Parti Québécois and the independence movement lost their progressive angle, and it was almost fatal for them. Meanwhile, Ottawa was starting to have significant surpluses. It was indecent to have such high surpluses during a period of austerity, so Ottawa decided to hide them. And that's where the idea came from, to create a series of foundations. Marcel Massé decided to create a series of these, and by giving these foundations large sums, he would be able to empty the public coffers, reduce the surplus on paper, and continue to refuse increases to transfers, which would have enabled Quebec-managed services to continue. But in order for this money to disappear from the surpluses, the government couldn't control it directly. So the lack of control that we see here over public funds was not an accident. It was actually necessary for this strategy to work. In 2005, the AG at the time, Sheila Fraser, produced a devastating report According to this report, the federal government had transferred $9 billion to 15 foundations between 1998 and 2002, which represents $17 billion today. And according to the AG, the government had no control over 7 out of these $9 billion. These foundations did various things, like offer study grants, support research projects, support infrastructure. For example, the Strategic Infrastructure Fund, which worked directly with municipalities to weaken Quebec's control, or to favor industrial innovation. The goal was to make Ottawa synonymous with the idea of the future. So STTC, created in 2001, was part of these 15 organizations. It was one of these foundations, and so the fact that public funds were no longer under the government's control at STTC is no accident. 19 years after that 2005 report, including 10 years of the Harper government, STTC still exists. And this loss of control over public funds has never been fixed. And that brings us to the issue we've been debating for a week. The Conservatives want to say that this is a liberal scandal, but actually this is a deeper problem that transcends party divisions. STTC reveals a widespread problem within the federal government. It is a problem that has metastasized. The federal government is so incredibly ineffective. It's treating public money as if it were monopoly dollars. Meanwhile, while Ottawa runs around wasting money, Quebec is struggling to pay for its services, which is almost all of the services, by the way, that Quebecers receive. As the parliamentary budget director officer keeps telling us year after year, the cost of the services that Quebec and the provinces have to offer is increasing more quickly than their revenues. And Ottawa is charging more in taxes than what it actually needs for its own responsibilities. And the effects and consequences of this tax imbalance are severe. Quebec is in a difficult position because once it pays the bill for absolutely essential services, it no longer has financial leeway to enable Quebecers to decide for themselves on their future social, economic, and cultural societal developments. But the federal government has no such restrictions. It can do whatever it wants, keep interfering, and it doesn't feel the need to efficiently manage its programs. So the effect of this tax imbalance is that waste is inherent to the current federal system, and it extends to all aspects of this government's activities. For example, it costs 2.5 times as much to manage an employment insurance file in Ottawa than a similar file in Quebec. Or for the federal government, to issue a passport costs 4 times as much as it does for Quebec to issue a driver's license. Before transferred to Quebec, each service in the Veterans Hospital in Sainte-Anne-de-Bellevue cost 2.5 times as much than such a service would have been in a Quebec health center. If Ottawa were responsible for health services, we wouldn't have enough money for health insurance. And as we keep repeating, this is not just a liberal problem. Waste and interference are inherent to this federal government system, no matter what party is in power. For example, in 2014, the Quebec government published an expert report on federal interventions in the health and social services sector from 2002 to 2013, which was almost entirely under the Harper government. According to this report, there were 37 federal programs that all represented interference in the area of health, and all this under the Conservatives. The actual amounts transferred were fairly low, but the level of interference was high, and people weren't getting their money's worth. This committee of experts estimated that the costs of managing these interferences was actually higher than the amount of the transfers. It cost more for the government of Quebec. It would actually have been better and more frugal to refuse the transfers. So that means this represented complete wastage of public funds. 1 billion here, 10 billion there, with no checks or balances. Ottawa, the federal government, doesn't give any direct services except to Indigenous communities and veterans, and we can see the results there. They're poor. And yet somehow it managed to hire 109,000 civil servants, additional civil servants, since 2015. Imagine if those 100,000 individuals had been hired in Quebec to work in the healthcare system or to teach children or to work on infrastructure. It could have represented such a huge change. But in any case, let's come back to SDTC and this recent AG report. On June 4th, the AG published her SDTC performance audit. She analyzed the organization's activities between April 2017 and December 2023. According to the report, there were serious problems of governance at the fund. There was a lack of management of conflicts of interests and a total absence of criteria when it came to attributing the money, allocating the money. According to the AG, the board of this organization was not aware in a timely fashion of conflict of interests, and some board members continued to debate matters after they had already stated that they had a conflict of interest. The board allowed its members to self-disclose their conflicts of interest instead of having a registry. There was a registry as of 2022, but there were inconsistencies between the registry and minutes of meetings. According to the AG, there were 90 cases totaling $76 million where this conflict of interest policy was not respected. According to board members, these mistakes were actually about mistakes in the minutes, not problems with the policy. But the AG has reminded us that it is up to board members to have the minutes corrected when they're adopted. And there were also members who voted against the policy during COVID-19 payments, according to the AG. But the board members said that they have received legal advice that says the opposite. And the AG also says that the policy did not include clear directions on possible cases of apparent conflict of interest. She noted 5 cases of business or personal relationships which would give the impression that there was a conflict of interest. Now, when it comes to allocating money, the AG has noted that because these eligibility criteria were vague, some projects were deemed eligible even though they did not actually meet the fund's objective. This also led to situations where consultants were asked to provide advice on selecting projects, but that ultimately led to advice that was contradictory with what has been offered by employees of the fund because the instructions were so vague. But SDTC has replied that the AG's conclusions are not entirely correct because the documentation that she analyzed did not reflect the in-depth analyses made by SDTC. SDTC says that it engaged in due diligence on each and every project and that external consultants' advice was integrated to their analysis. Who should we believe in all this? Madam Speaker. Now let me turn to the issue of whistleblowers. As you know, in 2022, whistleblowers stated that they were concerned about managing human resources and public funds at SDTC. Let me briefly give you an overview of what happened. According to what was published in the media, in November 2022, whistleblowers first turned to the Auditor General's office to share that they were concerned about the management of HR and public funds within SDTC. The AG suggested that they send their concerns to the Office of the Privy Council, which received a 300-page document in this regard, with allegations dating back to February 2022. And later, executives at ISED took up the matter. In November 2023, according to the media, it was made public that whistleblowers had sent recordings of a conversation where higher-ups at ISED were trying to force the government to change its approach to managing allegations about governance and management at SDTC. On the same day, the AG announced that an audit would be carried out about how SDTC was funding its sustainable development technologies within ISED. On the following day, Andrew Hayes, the deputy AG, appeared before a House of Commons committee, the Public Accounts Committee, and indicated that the Auditor General's office was still trying to determine the scope of the audit. He stated that the audit would be over by June 2024. Then on November 6th, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry appeared before the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, known as the Ethics Committee, to discuss allegations according to governance and fund management at SDTC. He stated that ISED had asked SDTC to take all necessary measures to carry out an in-depth review of all allegations on the management of human resources. The review was supposed to be carried out by an independent legal office, which would then share its conclusions with the minister. On November 8th, SDTC representatives appeared before the Ethics Committee: Leah Lawrence, Cheryl Urey, and Anna Verschuren, who was the chair of the board. During that meeting, Ms. Verschuren stated that she had made a motion at the SDTC board which led to increased funding to the tune of $217,000 to NR Store, a company that she has managed since 2012. She also confirmed at committee that she receives $120,000 a year in wages from that business. She stated that she moved this motion after the board asked her to, and after it had received legal opinions stating that it was not necessary to redeclare conflicts of interest that had already been reported about existing projects.
She also stated that all organizations funded by SDTC were treated the same way and received the same amount of money. On November 10th, Ms. Lawrence resigned from her position at SDTC. In the media, it was reported that she wrote in her resignation letter to SDTC, based on reports in the media from witnesses of the Commission of the House of Commons, and based on the controversy, it's clear that there has been a campaign to undermine my role and leadership. On November 17th, there was a report that revealed that Conrad Van Finkelstein, Commissioner for Conflicts of Interest and Ethics, decided to look into these issues and the decisions made by Ms. Verschuren. Then on the 20th of November, she resigned from her position at SDTC. There was a statement thanking her. SDTC, in this thank you statement, said the board of directors will meet this week to assess the board's reaction to the action plan presented by ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, with a view to submitting ISED's response on December 1st and to allow Canadian entrepreneurs to benefit from new funding as soon as possible. It's clear that SDTC has not always managed public funds in accordance with its legislative mandate. That was inherent to its very structure. It was structurally problematic since it was founded, in my view, as I often said. And it's also clear that the oversight by ISED did not guarantee that public money was administered based on contribution agreements and based on applicable government policy. That is the full saga, Madam Speaker. In June of this year, the House voted for a motion calling on the government to table documents within a timeline which was not respected. The government refuses to submit the requested documents. The Parliament has the power to compel the government to release documents. The only limit to this House's capacity to demand the government to produce information is this House's good judgment. It's not the government's decision. It's not about whether it wants to. So if the government doesn't respect the will of the House, then the principle of responsible government is disrespected. On June 10th, the House clearly called on the government to hand in a host of documents to the parliamentary law clerk so that the law clerk could send them to the police and to relevant authorities. The government did not follow that order, which was a breach of the privileges of this House. As I said, the only limit to the capacity of this House demanding information, it's the good judgment of this House, not the government's will to do so or not. So that's all. I'll stop for now, and I'd be happy to answer questions. Thank you very much. Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lilley, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Thank you, Madam Speaker. thank my colleague for giving us the entire timeline of the file. I sit on the Industry Committee. We heard, as a witness, not once but 3 times, Ms. Verschuren, former SDTC president. She said there was no ill will or bad intentions. She had received legal advice, that the legal advice was not good. But beyond all that, there was a serious issue that occurred. So regardless of the Board of Administration, here's my question to my colleague. As soon as there is a possibility of a conflict of interest, my colleague is very intelligent. He knows full well that to put oneself in a conflict of interest it's very easy to know when you're doing so, to know whether you are entering into a conflict of interest or not. So does he feel that these individuals were in a conflict of interest in basically all decisions they took? Thank you, the honourable member for Joliette. I thank my colleague for his question. That relates to a speech he made, I think it was on Thursday, about ethics. So, for example, if you're on a board and you receive a salary from yourself, what is that? That's the bare minimum. Anyone who represents a foundation who is on a board of directors, you shouldn't put yourself in a conflict of interest like that. That makes no sense. I'd also like to remind everyone of how important whistleblowers are for informing the government and the media of this situation. It's shameful that the government did not present legislation to protect whistleblowers. In fact, the Bloc Québécois presented legislation in this House to protect whistleblowers because whistleblowers play a very important role. They sound the alarm about misdeeds like that, and it's important to at least protect them.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the honourable member stated that the arm's length bodies, the foundation, 15 foundations, as he mentioned, have been created and funded by the federal government. He used the word that we lose loss of control over the funding that goes to these organizations like STDC. But later part of his speech, he referred extensively from the Auditor General's report and the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner's report on the issue related to STDC. So is it not contradictory? In fact, the Parliament has the control over the funding that goes to these foundations, to other organizations, the crown corporations, and we have the mechanism to see that it is administered properly. And when it is not done so, like in this case, there is a mechanism that kicks into process, and that is what we are dealing with.
The honourable member for Joliette. I thank my colleague for his excellent question. The colleague raised important issues. Thank you to the member for Nepean. What we're saying, and in fact, the former Treasury Board President, Marcel Massé, he said it too. The goal was to cut money from the provinces and keep more money for the federal government, but to hide and cover all that up through foundations, to make the money disappear from the government's balance sheets. So, and then the federal government could not have direct oversight of the foundations. That was the problem. That's what Sheila Fraser pointed out as the problem in 2005. And that led to austerity and cuts and fewer services for Canadians. There can be indirect validation methods after the fact, but that's not enough, according to the Bloc Québécois. These foundations manage public money. The government and its work should be accountable, but then these foundations, there are no oversight, and there can only be indirect inquiry into it after the fact, which we find inadequate. That's why we find that the foundations themselves are problematic. These foundations were thought up by Marcel Massé. A brief question. The honourable member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Here's my question. It will be simple. It's been about a week or two that we've been debating the question of privilege raised here in this place. We haven't been debating it for very long, but this is the result of the government's stubborn refusal to hand over the documents. Had the government submitted the documents to the House, then Parliament wouldn't be all jammed up like this. So here's my question. Why is the government ready to set its entire legislative agenda aside rather than submit the documents? The Honourable Member for Joliette in 30 seconds. Yes, I'll be quick. Well, great question. There are a few hypotheses. We have a few theories. There was an order. The government was ordered to submit documents to the House. It did not do so. Now the government cannot move forward with any of its legislation. Well, this government is tired. They've run out of ideas for legislation. So maybe they're happy to not have to present anything new because they have nothing to present. Thank you, Madam Speaker. The time set aside for this debate has expired for the day. The House will resume consideration on the privilege motion on Monday at 11 a.m. on October 7th. The member will have 4 minutes remaining of questions and answers.
Before I wish to inform the honourable members that private members' business will be suspended on that day. Comme il est 2h30,
It being 2:30, the House stands adjourned until Monday at 11 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.